Are you searching for the best in online black radio? Then go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, helping you filter through the noise. Real talk, black talk.
I still have to take the stand that Dr. King has been a degree successful with the non-violence movement. Now, let us take the March on Washington, for instance. Was this not something that exemplified the feeling of the Negro and made everyone very, very happy?
It depends on whether or not anything was gotten out of it. In fact, yes, it probably made them happy. Most of the people I saw involved in the March on Washington looked very, very happy. In fact, they looked too happy to be involved in a Negro revolt. So that insofar as the March on Washington producing meaningful results, most of the masses of black people today, in this year, are beginning to see where nothing came of it other than the fact that it gave many of the bourgeois Negroes a chance to feel that they were doing something without really having to do anything. It became a status symbol. Just like going to the Kentucky Derby is a status symbol for those who know nothing about horses. They like to be able to say they went to the Kentucky Derby and they can't tell a horse from a cow. Or the Rose Bowl game. They like to be able to say they went to the Rose Bowl game and they don't know a football from a baseball. But the fact that they can say they went to the Rose Bowl game is a status symbol. Or the fact that they can say they went to the Kentucky Derby is a status symbol. So many Negroes took the opportunity to say that they were in the March on Washington. Not that it produced anything, or not that they really felt that they were involved in a Negro revolution, but it gave them a chance to say, I was there. It was a status symbol. But status symbols don't take us out of the alleys and out of the ghettos and out of the slums. Status symbols don't remove segregated school systems. Status symbols don't get meaningful civil rights legislation. So when it comes to the March on Washington and all of these other nonviolent approaches, they were good in their day. But this is a new day, and it's a new Negro.
But we will have to agree, Minister Malcolm, that the March on Washington was the forerunner to the creation of, or at least to the presentment of, the Civil Rights Bill. Without this type of approach, I doubt seriously that the Civil Rights Bill would have even been entered onto the floor.
A horse can enter into the race and come so far from the finish line that you don't even know that that horse was in the race. And since the March on Washington was designed to produce meaningful civil rights legislation, and if I recall, I heard several of the leaders of it point out that we'll be back if the bill meets with any kind of opposition come September. They said this in August. Now, September passed, and the bill, it didn't even come up. October passed, November passed, December passed, the year passed, everything passed, and the bill hasn't been passed yet.
Are you saying that you feel a more violent approach to it would cause this bill to be passed?
It's not a case of violence, and I think that our people should never let themselves be trapped intellectually into thinking that whenever they do something to defend themselves against the violence of the white man, that they're being violent.
Context of White Supremacy. Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Friday, April 17th, 2015. So I have been told we will get right to work. We are in Chapter 17, Mecca, the Autobiography of Malcolm X as told to Alex Haley. The narrator is Earl Hyman. Context of White Supremacy.
Establishing the rapport was the best thing that could have happened in the compartment. My being an American Muslim changed the attitudes from merely watching me to wanting to look out for me. Now the others began smiling steadily. They came closer. They were frankly looking me up and down, inspecting me, very friendly. I was like a man from Mars. The Mutawaf's aide returned, indicating that I should go with him. He pointed from our tier down at the mosque, and I knew that he'd come to take me to make the morning prayer, El Sob, always before sunrise. I followed him down, and we passed pilgrims by the thousands, babbling languages, everything but English. I was angry with myself for not having taken the time to learn more of the Orthodox prayer rituals before leaving America. In Elijah Muhammad's Nation of Islam, we hadn't prayed in Arabic. About a dozen or more years before, when I was in prison, a member of the Orthodox Muslim movement in Boston named Abdul Hamid, had visited me and had later sent me prayers in Arabic. At that time I learned those prayers phonetically, but I hadn't used them since. I made up my mind to let the guide do everything first, and I would watch him. It wasn't hard to get him to do things first. He wanted to anyway. Just outside the mosque, there was a long trough with rows of faucets. Ablutions had to precede praying. I knew that. Even watching the Mutawaf's helper, I didn't get it right. There's an exact way that an Orthodox Muslim washes, and the exact way is very important. I followed him into the mosque, just a step behind, watching. He did his prostration, his head to the ground. I did mine. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. All Muslim prayers began that way. After that, I may not have been mumbling the right thing, but I was mumbling. I don't mean to have any of this sound joking. It was far from a joke with me. No one who happened to be watching could tell that I wasn't saying what the others said. After that sunrise prayer, my guide accompanied me back up to the 4th tier. By sign language, he said he would return within 3 hours, then he left. Our tier gave an excellent daylight view of the whole airport area. I stood at the railing, watching. Planes were landing and taking off like clockwork. Thousands upon thousands of people from all over the world made colorful patterns of movement. I saw groups leaving for Mecca in buses, trucks, cars. I saw some setting out to walk the 40 miles. I wished that I could start walking. At least I knew how to do that. I was afraid to think what might lie ahead. Would I be rejected as a Mecca pilgrim? I wondered what the test would consist of, and when I would face the Muslim High Court. The Persian Muslim in our compartment came up to me at the rail. He greeted me, hesitantly. American? He indicated that he wanted me to come and have breakfast with him and his wife on their rug. I knew that it was an immense offer he was making. You don't have tea with a Muslim's wife. I didn't want to impose. I don't know if the Persian understood enough when I shook my head and smiled, meaning, no thanks. He brought me some tea and cookies anyway. Until then, I hadn't even thought about eating. Others made gestures. They would just come up and smile and nod at me. My first friend, the one who had spoken a little English, was gone. I didn't know it, but he was spreading the word of an American Muslim on the 4th tier. Traffic had begun to pick up, going past our compartment. Muslims in the Ihram garb, or still in their national dress, walked slowly past, smiling. It would go on for as long as I was there to be seen, but I hadn't yet learned that I was the attraction. I've always been restless and curious. The Mutawaf's aide didn't return in the 3 hours he had said, and that made me nervous. I feared that he'd given up on me as beyond help. By then, too, I was really getting hungry. All of the Muslims in the compartment had offered me food, and I'd refused. The trouble was, I have to admit it, at that point I didn't know if I could go for their manner of eating. Everything was in one pot on the dining room rug, and I saw them just fall right in, using their hands. I kept standing at the tier railing observing the courtyard below, and I decided to explore a bit on my own. I went down to the 1st tier. I thought then that maybe I shouldn't get too far. Someone might come for me. So I went back up to our compartment. In about 45 minutes I went back down. I went further this time, feeling my way. I saw a little restaurant in the courtyard. I went straight in there. It was jammed and babbling with languages. Using gestures, I bought a whole roasted chicken and something like thick potato chips. I got back out in the courtyard and I tore up that chicken, using my hands. Muslims were doing the same thing all around me. I saw men at least 70 years old bringing both legs up under them until they made a human knot of themselves, eating with as much aplomb and satisfaction as though they'd been in a fine restaurant with waiters all over the place. All ate as one and slept as one. Everything about the pilgrimage atmosphere accented the oneness of man under one God. I made during the day several trips up to the compartment and back out in the courtyard, each time exploring a little further than before. Once I nodded at 2 black men standing together. I nearly shouted when one spoke to me in British accented English. Before their party approached, ready to leave for Mecca, we were able to talk enough to exchange that I was American and they were Ethiopians. I was heartsick. I'd found 2 English-speaking Muslims at last, and they were leaving. The Ethiopians had both been schooled in Cairo, and they were living in Riyadh, the political capital of Arabia. I was later going to learn to my surprise that in Ethiopia, With 18 million people, 10 million are Muslims. Most people think Ethiopia is Christian, but only its government is Christian. The West has always helped to keep the Christian government in power. I just said my sunset prayer, El Maghrib. I was lying on my cot in the fourth-tier compartment, feeling blue and alone, when out of the darkness came a sudden light. It was actually a sudden thought. On one of my venturings in the yard, full of activity below, I'd noticed 4 men, officials, seated at a table with a telephone. Now I thought about seeing them there, and with telephone, my mind flashed to the connection that Dr. C.O.W.S in New York had given me, the telephone number of the son of the author of the book which had been given to me. Omar Azam lived right there in Jeddah. In a matter of a few minutes, I was downstairs and rushing to where I'd seen the 4 officials. One of them spoke functional English. I excitedly showed him the letter from Dr. C.O.W.S. He read it. Then he read it aloud to the other 3 officials. A Muslim from America. I could almost see it capture their imaginations and curiosity. They were very impressed. I asked the English-speaking one if he would please do me the favor of telephoning Dr. Omar Azam at the number I had. He was glad to do it. He got someone on the phone and conversed in Arabic. Dr. Omar Azam came straight to the airport. With the 4 officials beaming, he wrung my hand in welcome, a young, tall, powerfully built man. I'd say he was 6'3". He had an extremely polished manner. In America he would have been called a white man, but it struck me hard and instantly from the way he acted. I had no feeling of him being a white man. "Why didn't you call before?" he demanded of me. He showed some identification to the 4 officials, and he used their phone. Speaking in Arabic, he was talking with some airport officials. "Come," he said. In something less than half an hour, he'd got me released. My suitcase and passport had been retrieved from customs, and we were in Dr. Azam's car driving through the city of Jeddah, with me dressed in the ihram, 2 towels, and sandals. I was speechless at the man's attitude, and at my own physical feeling of no difference between us as human beings. I had heard for years of Muslim hospitality, but one couldn't quite imagine such warmth. I asked questions. Dr. Azam was a Swiss-trained engineer. His field was city planning. The Saudi Arabian government had borrowed him from the United Nations to direct all the reconstruction work being done on Arabian holy places. And Dr. Azam's sister was the wife of Prince Faisal's son. I was in a car with the brother-in-law of the son of the ruler of Arabia. Nor was that all that Allah had done. "My father will be so happy to meet you," said Dr. Azam, the author who had sent me the book. I asked questions about his father. Abd-ir-Rahman Azam was known as Azam Pasha, or Lord Azam, until the Egyptian Revolution, when President Nasser eliminated all Lord and noble titles. "He should be at my home when we get there," Dr. Azam said. "He spends much time in New York with his United Nations work, and he has followed you with great interest." I was speechless. It was early in the morning when we reached Dr. Azam's home. His father was there, his father's brother, a chemist, and another friend, all up that early, waiting. Each of them embraced me as though I were a long-lost child. I'd never seen these men before in my life, and they treated me so good. I'm going to tell you that I had never been so honored in my life, nor had I ever received such true hospitality. A servant brought tea and coffee and disappeared. I was urged to make myself comfortable. No women were anywhere in view. In Arabia, you could easily think there were no females. Dr. Abd-ir-Rahman Azam dominated the conversation. Why hadn't I called before? They couldn't understand why I hadn't. Was I comfortable? They seemed embarrassed that I'd spent the time at the airport, that I'd been delayed in getting to Mecca. No matter how I protested that I felt no inconvenience, that I was fine, they would not hear it. "You must rest," Dr. Azam said. He went to use the telephone. I didn't know what this distinguished man was doing. I had no dream. When I was told that I would be brought back for dinner that evening, and that meanwhile I should get back in the car, how could I have realized that I was about to see the epitome of Muslim hospitality? Abd-ir-Rahman Azam, when at home, lived in a suite at the Jeddah Palace Hotel. Because I'd come to them with a letter from a friend, he was going to stay at his son's home and let me use his suite until I could get on to Mecca. When I found out, there was no use protesting. I was in the suite. Young Dr. Azam was gone. There was no one to protest to. The 3-room suite had a bathroom that was as big as a double at the New York Hilton. It was suite number 214. There was even a porch outside, affording a beautiful view of the ancient Red Sea city. There had never before been in my emotions such an impulse to pray, and I did, prostrating myself on the living room rug. Nothing in either of my 2 careers as a black man in America had served to give me any idealistic tendencies. My instincts automatically examined the reasons, the motives of anyone who did anything they didn't have to do for me. Always in my life, if it was any white person, I could see a selfish motive. But there in that hotel that morning, a telephone call and a few hours away from the cot on the 4th floor tier of the dormitory, was one of the few times I had been so awed that I was totally without resistance. That white man, at least he would have been considered white in America, related to Arabia's ruler, to whom he was a close adviser, truly an international man, with nothing in the world to gain, had given up his suite to me for my transient comfort. He had nothing to gain. He didn't need me. He had everything. In fact, he had more to lose than gain. He had followed the American press about me. If he did that, he knew there was only stigma attached to me. I was supposed to have horns. I was a racist. I was anti-white. And he, from all appearances, was white. I was supposed to be a criminal. Not only that, but everyone was even accusing me of using his religion of Islam as a cloak for my criminal practices and philosophies. Even if he had had some motive to use me, he knew that I was separated from Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam, my power base, according to the press in America. The only organization that I had was just a few weeks old. I had no job. I had no money. Just to get over there, I'd had to borrow money from my sister. That morning was when I first began to reappraise the white man. It was when I first began to perceive that white man, as commonly used, means complexion only secondarily. Primarily, it described attitudes and actions. In America, white man meant specific attitudes and actions toward the black man and toward all other non-white men. But in the Muslim world, I had seen that men with white complexions were more genuinely brotherly than anyone else had ever been. That morning was the start of a radical alteration in my whole outlook about white men. I should quote from my notebook here. I wrote this about noon in the hotel. My excitement sitting here, waiting to go before the Hajj committee, is indescribable. My window faces to the sea, westward. The streets are filled with the incoming pilgrims from all over the world. The prayers are to Allah, and verses from the Koran are on the lips of everyone. Never have I seen such a beautiful sight, nor witnessed such a scene, nor felt such an atmosphere. Although I am excited, I feel safe and secure, thousands of miles from the totally different life that I have known. Imagine that 24 hours ago, I was in the 4th floor room over the airport, surrounded by people with whom I could not communicate, feeling uncertain about the future and very lonely. And then, one phone call, following Dr. C.O.W.S. instructions. I have met one of the most powerful men in the Muslim world. I will soon sleep in his bed at the Jeddah Palace. I know that I am surrounded by friends whose sincerity and religious zeal I can feel. I must pray again to thank Allah for this blessing, and I must pray again that my wife and children back in America will always be blessed for their sacrifices too. I did pray, 2 more prayers, as I told my notebook. Then I slept for about 4 hours until the telephone rang. It was young Dr. Azam. In another hour, he would pick me up to return me there for dinner. I tumbled words over one another, trying to express some of the thanks I felt for all of their actions. He cut me off. MashaAllah, which means, it is as Allah has pleased. I seized the opportunity to run down into the lobby to see it again before Dr. Azam arrived. When I opened my door, just across the hall from me, a man in some ceremonial dress, who obviously lived there, was also headed downstairs, surrounded by attendants. I followed them down, then through the lobby. Outside, a small caravan of automobiles was waiting. My neighbor appeared through the Jeddah Palace Hotel's front entrance, and people rushed and crowded him, kissing his hand. I found out who he was, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. Later in the hotel, I would have the opportunity to talk with him for about a half hour. He was a cordial man of great dignity. He was well up on world affairs, and even the latest events in America. I will never forget the dinner at the Azam home. I quote my notebook again. I couldn't say in my mind that these were white men. Why, the men acted as if they were brothers of mine. The elder Dr. Azam as if he were my father. His fatherly, scholarly speech. I felt like he was my father. He was, you could tell, a highly skilled diplomat, with a broad range of mind. His knowledge was so worldly. He was as current on world affairs as some people are to what's going on in their living room. The more we talked, the more his vast reservoir of knowledge and its variety seemed unlimited. He spoke of the racial lineage of the descendants of Muhammad the Prophet, and he showed how they were both black and white. He also pointed out how color, the complexities of color, and the problems of color which exist in the Muslim world exist only where, and to the extent that, that area of the Muslim world has been influenced by the West. He said that if one encountered any differences based on attitude toward color, this directly reflected the degree of Western influence. I learned during dinner that while I was at the hotel, the Hajj Committee Court had been notified about my case, and that in the morning I should be there. And I was. The judge was Sheikh Muhammad Harkon. The court was empty except for me and a sister from India, formerly a Protestant who had converted to Islam and was, like me, trying to make the Hajj. She was brown-skinned with a small face that was mostly covered. Judge Harkon was a kind, impressive man. We talked. He asked me some questions having to do with my sincerity. I answered him as truly as I could. He not only recognized me as a true Muslim, but he gave me 2 books, one in English, the other in Arabic. He recorded my name in the Holy Register of True Muslims, and we were ready to part. He told me, "I hope you will become a great preacher of Islam in America." I said that I shared that hope, and I would try to fulfill it. The Azam family were very elated that I was qualified and accepted to go to Mecca. I had lunch at the Jeddah Palace. Then I slept again for several hours until the telephone awakened me. It was Muhammad Abdul Aziz Maged, the Deputy Chief of Protocol for Prince Faisal. "A special car will be waiting to take you to Mecca, right after your dinner," he told me. He advised me to eat heartily, as the Hajj rituals require plenty of strength. I was beyond astonishment by then. 2 young Arabs accompanied me to Mecca. A well-lighted modern turnpike highway made the trip easy. Guards at intervals along the way took one look at the car, and the driver made a sign, and we were passed through, never even having to slow down. I was all at once thrilled, important, humble, and thankful. Mecca, when we entered, seemed as ancient as time itself. Our car slowed through the winding streets, lined by shops on both sides, and with buses, cars, and trucks, and tens of thousands of pilgrims from all over the earth were everywhere. The car halted briefly at a place where a mutawaf was waiting for me. He wore the white skull cap and long nightshirt garb that I'd seen at the airport. He was a short, dark-skinned Arab named Muhammad. He spoke no English whatever. We parked near the great mosque. We performed our ablution and entered. Pilgrims seemed to be on top of each other. There were so many, lying, sitting, sleeping, praying, walking. My vocabulary cannot describe the new mosque that was being built around the Kaaba. I was thrilled to realize that it was only one of the tremendous rebuilding tasks under the direction of young Dr. Azam, who had just been my host. The great mosque of Mecca, when it is finished, will surpass the architectural beauty of India's Taj Mahal. Carrying my sandals, I followed the mutawaf. Then I saw the Kaaba, a huge black stone house in the middle of the great mosque. It was being circumambulated by thousands upon thousands of praying pilgrims, both sexes and every size, shape, color, and race in the world. I knew the prayer to be uttered when the pilgrim's eyes first perceived the Kaaba. Translated, it is, "O God, you are peace, and peace derives from you. So greet us, O Lord, with peace." Upon entering the mosque, the pilgrim should try to kiss the Kaaba if possible, but if the crowds prevent him getting that close, he touches it, and if the crowds prevent that, he raises his hand and cries out, "Takbir!" God is great. I could not get within yards. Takbir. My feeling there in the house of God was a numbness. My mutawaf led me in the crowd of praying, chanting pilgrims, moving 7 times around the Kaaba. Some were bent and wizened with age. It was a sight that stamped itself on the brain. I saw incapacitated pilgrims being carried by others. Faces were enraptured in their faith. The 7th time around I prayed 2 rak'ah, prostrating myself, my head on the floor. The first prostration I prayed the Quran verse, "Say he is God, the one and only." The second prostration, "Say, O you who are unbelievers, I worship not that which you worship." As I prostrated, the Mutawaf fended pilgrims off to keep me from being trampled. The Mutawaf and I next drank water from the well of Zemzem. Then we ran between the 2 hills, Safa and Marwa, where Hajar wandered over the same earth searching for water for her child, Ishmael. 3 separate times after that, I visited the great mosque and circumambulated the Kaaba. The next day we set out after sunrise toward Mount Arafat, thousands of us, crying in unison, "Labbaika, Labbaika," and "Allah Akbar." Mecca is surrounded by the crudest-looking mountains I've ever seen. They seem to be made of the slag from a blast furnace. No vegetation is on them at all. Arriving about noon, we prayed and chanted from noon until sunset, and the Asr, afternoon, and Maghrib, sunset, special prayers were performed. Finally, we lifted our hands in prayer and thanksgiving, repeating Allah's words. There is no God but Allah. He has no partner. His are authority and praise. Good emanates from him, and he has power over all things. Standing on Mount Arafat had concluded the essential rites of being a pilgrim to Mecca. No one who missed it could consider himself a pilgrim. The Ihram had ended. We cast the traditional 7 stones at the devil. Some had their hair and beards cut. I decided that I was going to let my beard remain. I wondered what my wife Betty and our little daughters were going to say when they saw me with a beard when I got back to New York. New York seemed 1,000,000 miles away. I hadn't seen a newspaper that I could read since I left New York. I had no idea what was happening there. A Negro rifle club that had been in existence for over 12 years in Harlem had been discovered by the police. It was being trumpeted that I was behind it. Elijah Muhammad's Nation of Islam had a lawsuit going against me to force me and my family to vacate the house in which we lived on Long Island. The major press, radio, and television media in America had representatives in Cairo hunting all over, trying to locate me, to interview me about the furor in New York that I had allegedly caused when I knew nothing about any of it. I only knew what I'd left in America, and how it contrasted with what I'd found in the Muslim world. About 20 of us Muslims who had finished the Hajj were sitting in a huge tent on Mount Arafat. As a Muslim from America, I was the center of attention. They asked me what about the Hajj had impressed me the most. One of the several who spoke English asked. They translated my answers for the others. My answer to that question was not the one they expected, but it drove home my point. I said, the brotherhood. The people of all races, colors from all over the world coming together as one. It has proved to me the power of the one God. It may have been out of taste, but that gave me an opportunity, and I used it, to preach them a quick little sermon on America's racism and its evils. I could tell the impact of this upon them. They had been aware that the plight of the black man in America was bad, but they had not been aware that it was inhuman, that it was a psychological castration. These people from elsewhere around the world were shocked. As Muslims, they had a very tender heart for all unfortunates, and very sensitive feelings for truth and justice. And in everything I said to them, as long as we talked, they were aware of the yardstick that I was using to measure everything. That to me the earth's most explosive and pernicious evil is racism, the inability of God's creatures to live as one, especially in the Western world. I have reflected since that the letter I finally sat down to compose had been subconsciously shaping itself in my mind. The color blindness of the Muslim world's religious society and the color blindness of the Muslim world's human society. These two influences had each day been making a greater impact and an increasing persuasion against my previous way of thinking. The first letter was, of course, to my wife, Betty. I never had a moment's question that Betty, after initial amazement, would change her thinking to join mine. I had known 1,000 reassurances that Betty's faith in me was total. I knew that she would see what I had seen, that in the land of Muhammad and the land of Abraham, I had been blessed by Allah with a new insight into the true religion of Islam and a better understanding of America's entire racial dilemma. After the letter to my wife, I wrote next essentially the same letter to my sister Ella, and I knew where Ella would stand. She had been saving to make the pilgrimage to Mecca herself. I wrote to Dr. Shawabi, whose belief in my sincerity had enabled me to get a passport to Mecca. All through the night, I copied similar long letters for others who were very close to me. Among them was Elijah Muhammad's son, Wallace Muhammad, who had expressed to me his conviction that the only possible salvation for the nation of Islam would be its accepting and projecting a better understanding of Orthodox Islam. And I wrote to my loyal assistants at my newly formed Muslim Mosque Incorporated in Harlem, with a note appended, asking that my letter be duplicated and distributed to the press. I knew that when my letter became public knowledge back in America, many would be astounded, loved ones, friends, and enemies alike. And no less astounded would be millions whom I did not know, who had gained during my 12 years with Elijah Muhammad a hate image of Malcolm X. Even I was myself astounded, but there was precedent in my life for this letter. My whole life had been a chronology of changes. Here is what I wrote from my heart. Never have I witnessed such sincere hospitality and the overwhelming spirit of true brotherhood as is practiced by people of all colors and races here in this ancient holy land, the home of Abraham, Muhammad, and all the other prophets of the Holy Scriptures. For the past week, I have been utterly speechless and spellbound by the graciousness I see displayed all around me by people of all colors. I have been blessed to visit the holy city of Mecca. I have made my 7 circuits around the Kaaba, led by a young mutawaf named Muhammad. I drank water from the well of Zemzem. I ran 7 times back and forth between the hills of Mount Al-Safa and Al-Marwa. I have prayed in the ancient city of Mina, and I have prayed on Mount Arafat. There were tens of thousands of pilgrims from all over the world. They were of all colors, from blue-eyed blondes to black-skinned Africans. But we were all participating in the same ritual, displaying a spirit of unity and brotherhood that my experiences in America had led me to believe never could exist between the white and the non-white. America needs to understand Islam, because this is the one religion that erases from its society the race problem. Throughout my travels in the Muslim world, I have met, talked to, and even eaten with people who, in America, would have been considered white. But the white attitude was removed from their minds by the religion of Islam. I have never before seen sincere and true brotherhood practiced by all colors together, irrespective of their color. You may be shocked by these words coming from me, but on this pilgrimage, what I have seen and experienced has forced me to rearrange much of my thought patterns previously held and to toss aside some of my previous conclusions. This was not too difficult for me. Despite my firm convictions, I have been always a man who tries to face facts and to accept the reality of life as new experience and new knowledge unfolds it. I have always kept an open mind, which is necessary to the flexibility that must go hand in hand with every form of intelligent search for truth. During the past 11 days here in the Muslim world, I have eaten from the same plate, drunk from the same glass, and slept in the same bed or on the same rug, while praying to the same God, with fellow Muslims whose eyes were the bluest of blue, whose hair was the blondest of blonde, and whose skin was the whitest of white. And in the words, and in the actions, and in the deeds of the white Muslims, I felt the same sincerity that I felt among the black African Muslims of Nigeria, Sudan, and Ghana. We were truly all the same, brothers, because their belief in one God had removed the white from their minds, the white from their behavior, and the white from their attitude. I could see from this that perhaps if white Americans could accept the oneness of God, then perhaps, too, they could accept in reality the oneness of man, and cease to measure and hinder and harm others in terms of their differences in color. With racism plaguing America like an incurable cancer, the so-called Christian white American heart should be more receptive to a proven solution to such a destructive problem. Perhaps it could be in time to save America from imminent disaster, the same destruction brought upon Germany by racism that eventually destroyed the Germans themselves. Each hour here in the Holy Land enables me to have greater spiritual insights into what is happening in America between black and white. The American Negro never can be blamed for his racial animosities. He is only reacting to 400 years of the conscious racism of the American whites. But as racism leads America up the suicide path, I do believe, from the experiences that I've had with them, that the whites of the younger generation, in the colleges and universities, will see the handwriting on the wall, and many of them will turn to the spiritual path of truth, the only way left to America to ward off the disaster that racism inevitably must lead to. Never have I been so highly honored. Never have I been made to feel more humble and unworthy. Who would believe the blessings that have been heaped upon an American Negro? A few nights ago, a man who would be called in America a white man, a United Nations diplomat, an ambassador, a companion of kings, gave me his hotel suite, his bed. By this man, His Excellency Prince Faisal, who rules this Holy Land, was made aware of my presence here in Jeddah. The very next morning, Prince Faisal's son, in person, informed me that by the will and decree of his esteemed father, I was to be a state guest. The Deputy Chief of Protocol himself took me before the Hajj court. His Holiness Sheikh Mohammed Hakan himself okayed my visit to Mecca. His Holiness gave me 2 books on Islam, with his personal seal and autograph, and he told me that he prayed that I would be a successful preacher of Islam in America. A car, a driver, and a guide have been placed at my disposal, making it possible for me to travel about this Holy Land almost at will. The government provides air-conditioned quarters and servants in each city that I visit. Never would I have even thought of dreaming that I would ever be a recipient of such honors. Honors that in America would be bestowed upon a king, not a Negro. All praise is due to Allah, the Lord of all the worlds. Sincerely, Hajj Malik El Shabazz, Malcolm X. Chapter 18. Hajj Malik El Shabazz. Prince Faisal, the absolute ruler of Arabia, had made me a guest of the state. Among the courtesies and privileges which this brought to me, especially, shamelessly, I relished the chauffeured car which toured me around in Mecca with the chauffeur guide pointing out sites of particular significance. Some of the holy city looked as ancient as time itself. Other parts of it resembled a modern Miami suburb. I cannot describe with what feelings I actually pressed my hands against the earth where the great prophets had trod 4,000 years before. The Muslim from America excited everywhere the most intense curiosity and interest. I was mistaken time and again for Cassius Clay. A local newspaper printed a photograph of Cassius and me together at the United Nations. Through my chauffeur, guide, interpreter, I was asked scores of questions about Cassius. Even children knew of him and loved him there in the Muslim world. By popular demand, the cinemas throughout Africa and Asia had shown his fight. At that moment in young Cassius' career, he had captured the imagination and the support of the entire dark world. My car took me to participate in special prayers at Mount Arafat and at Mina. The roads offered the wildest drives that I'd ever known. Nightmare traffic, brakes squealing, skidding cars, and horns blowing. I believe that all of the driving in the Holy Land is done in the name of Allah. I'd begun to learn the prayers in Arabic. Now my biggest prayer difficulty was physical. The unaccustomed prayer posture had caused my big toe to swell, and it pained me. But the Muslim world's customs no longer seemed strange to me. My hands now readily plucked up food from a common dish shared with brother Muslims. I was drinking without hesitation from the same glass as others. I was washing from the same little pitcher of water, and sleeping with 8 or 10 others on a mat in the open. I remember one night at Muzdalifah, with nothing but the sky overhead, I lay awake amid sleeping Muslim brothers, and I learned that pilgrims from every land, every color and class and rank, high officials and the beggar alike, all snored in the same language. I'll bet that in the parts of the Holy Land that I visited, 1 million bottles of soft drinks were consumed, and 10 million cigarettes must have been smoked. Particularly the Arab Muslims smoked constantly, even on the Hajj pilgrimage itself. The smoking evil wasn't invented in Prophet Muhammad's days. If it had been, I believe he would have banned it. It was the largest Hajj in history, I was later told. C.O.W.S of the Turkish Parliament, beaming with pride, informed me that from Turkey alone, over 600 buses, over 50,000 Muslims had made the pilgrimage. I told him that I dreamed to see the day when shiploads and planeloads of American Muslims would come to Mecca for the Hajj. There was a color pattern in the huge crowds. Once I happened to notice this, I closely observed it thereafter. Being from America made me intensely sensitive to matters of color. I saw that people who looked alike drew together, and most of the time stayed together. This was entirely voluntary, there being no other reason for it. But Africans were with Africans, Pakistanis were with Pakistanis, and so on. I tucked it into my mind that when I returned home I would tell Americans this observation, that where true brotherhood existed among all colors, where no one felt segregated, where there was no superiority complex, no inferiority complex, then voluntarily, naturally, people of the same kind felt drawn together by that which they had in common. It is my intention that by the time of my next Hajj pilgrimage, I will have at least a working vocabulary of Arabic. In my ignorant, crippled condition in the Holy Land, I have been lucky to have met patient friends who enabled me to talk by interpreting for me. Never before in my life had I felt so deaf and dumb as during the times when no interpreter was with me to tell me what was being said around me, or about me, or even to me by other Muslims, before they learned that the Muslim from America knew only a few prayers in Arabic, and beyond that he could only nod and smile. Behind my nods and smiles, though, I was doing some American-type thinking and reflection. I saw that Islam's conversions around the world could double and triple if the colorfulness and the true spiritualness of the Hajj pilgrimage were properly advertised and communicated to the outside world. I saw that the Arabs are poor at understanding the psychology of non-Arabs and the importance of public relations. The Arabs said, Insha'Allah, God willing. Then they waited for converts. Even by this means, Islam was on the march. But I knew that with improved public relations methods, the number of new converts turning to Allah could be turned into millions. Constantly, wherever I went, I was asked questions about America's racial discrimination. Even with my background, I was astonished at the degree to which the major single image of America seemed to be discrimination. In 100 different conversations in the Holy Land with Muslims high and low, and from around the world, and later, when I got to Black Africa, I don't have to tell you, never once did I bite my tongue or miss a single opportunity to tell the truth about the crimes, the evils, and the indignities that are suffered by the black man in America. Through my interpreter, I lost no opportunity to advertise the American black man's real plight. I preached it on the mountain at Arafat. I preached it in the busy lobby of the Jeddah Palace Hotel. I would point it one after another to bring it closer to home. You, because of your dark skin, in America, you too would be called Negro. You could be bombed and shot and cattle prodded and fire-hosed and beaten because of your complexions. As some of the poorest pilgrims heard me preach, so did some of the Holy World's most important personages. I talked at length with the blue-eyed, blonde-haired Hussein Amini, Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. We were introduced on Mount Arafat by C.O.W.S of the Turkish Parliament. Both were learned men. Both were especially well-read on America. C.O.W.S asked me why I had broken with Elijah Muhammad. I said that I preferred not to elaborate upon our differences in the interests of preserving the American black man's unity. They both understood and accepted that. I talked with the mayor of Mecca, Sheikh Abdullah Eraif, who when he was a journalist had criticized the methods of the Mecca municipality, and Prince Faisal made him the mayor to see if he could do any better. Everyone generally acknowledged that Sheikh Eraif was doing fine. A filmed feature, The Muslim from America, was made by Ahmed Horiallah and his partner Esid Mohammed of Tunis television station. In America once, in Chicago, Ahmed Hoyala had interviewed Elijah Muhammad. The lobby of the Jeddah Palace Hotel offered me frequent sizable informal audiences of important men from many different countries who were curious to hear the American Muslim. I met many Africans who had either spent some time in America or who had heard other Africans' testimony about America's treatment of the black man. I remember how before one large audience, one cabinet minister from black Africa, he knew more about worldwide current events than anyone else I've ever met, told of his occasionally traveling in the United States, North and South, deliberately not wearing his national dress. Just recalling the indignities he had met as a black man seemed to expose some raw nerve in this highly educated, dignified official. His eyes blazed in his passionate anger. His hands hacked the air. Why is the American black man so complacent about being trampled upon? Why doesn't the American black man fight to be a human being? A Sudanese high official hugged me. You champion the American black people. An Indian official wept in his compassion for my brothers in your land. I reflected many, many times to myself upon how the American Negro has been entirely brainwashed from ever seeing or thinking of himself as he should as a part of the non-white peoples of the world. The American Negro has no conception of the hundreds of millions of other non-whites concerned for him. He has no conception of their feeling of brotherhood for and with him. It was there in the Holy Land, and later in Africa, that I formed a conviction which I've had ever since, that a topmost requisite for any Negro leader in America ought to be extensive traveling in the non-white lands on this earth, and the travel should include many conferences with the ranking men of those lands. I guarantee that any honest, open-minded Negro leader would return home with more effective thinking about alternative avenues to solutions of the American black man's problem. Above all, the Negro leaders would find that many non-white officials of the highest standing, especially Africans, would tell them privately that they would be glad to throw their weight behind the Negro cause in the United Nations and in other ways. But these officials understandably feel that the Negro in America is so confused and divided that he doesn't himself know what his cause is. Again, it was mainly Africans who variously expressed to me that no one would wish to be embarrassed trying to help a brother who shows no evidence that he wants that help, and who seems to refuse to cooperate in his own interests. The American black leader's most critical problem is lack of imagination. His thinking, his strategies, if any, are always limited, at least basically, to only that which is either advised or approved by the white man. And the first thing the American power structure doesn't want any Negroes to start is thinking internationally. I think the single worst mistake of the American black organizations and their leaders is that they fail to establish direct brotherhood lines of communication between the independent nations of Africa and the American black people. Why, every day the black African heads of state should be receiving direct accounts of the latest developments in the American black man's struggles, instead of the U.S. State Department's releases to Africans which always implied that the American black man's struggle is being solved. Two American authors, bestsellers in the Holy Land, had helped to spread and intensify the concern for the American black man. James Baldwin's books, translated, had made a tremendous impact, as had the book Black Like Me by John Griffin. If you're unfamiliar with that book, it tells how the white man Griffin blackened his skin and spent 2 months traveling as a Negro about America. Then Griffin wrote of the experiences that he met. A frightening experience, I heard exclaimed many times by people in the Holy World who had read the popular book. But I never heard it without opening their thinking further. Well, if it was a frightening experience for him as nothing but a make-believe Negro for 60 days, then you think about what real Negroes in America have gone through for 400 years. One honor that came to me I'd prayed for. His Eminence, Prince Faisal, invited me to a personal audience with him. As I entered the room, tall, handsome Prince Faisal came from behind his desk. I never will forget the reflection I had at that instant, that here was one of the world's most important men, and yet with his dignity one saw clearly his sincere humility. He indicated for me a chair opposite from his. Our interpreter was the Deputy Chief of Protocol, Muhammad Abdul Aziz Maged, an Egyptian-born Arab who looked like a Harlem Negro. Prince Faisal impatiently gestured when I began stumbling for words, trying to express my gratitude for the great honor he had paid me in making me a guest of the state. It was only Muslim hospitality to another Muslim, he explained, and I was an unusual Muslim from America. He asked me to understand above all that whatever he had done had been his pleasure, with no other motives whatever. A gliding servant served a choice of 2 kinds of tea as Prince Faisal talked. His son, Muhammad Faisal, had met me on American television while attending a Northern California university. Prince Faisal had read Egyptian writers' articles about the American black Muslims. If what these writers say is true, the black Muslims have the wrong Islam, he said. I explained my role of the previous 12 years, of helping to organize and to build the nation of Islam. I said that my purpose for making the Hajj was to get an understanding of true Islam. That is good, Prince Faisal said, pointing out that there was an abundance of English translation literature about Islam, so that there was no excuse for ignorance, and no reason for sincere people to allow themselves to be misled. The last of April, 1964, I flew to Beirut, the seaport capital of Lebanon. A part of me I left behind in the holy city of Mecca, and in turn I took away with me, forever, a part of Mecca. I was on my way now to Nigeria, then Ghana, but some friends I had made in the Holy Land had urged and insisted that I make some stops en route, and I had agreed. For example, it had been arranged that I would first stop and address the faculty and the students at the American University of Beirut. In Beirut's Palm Beach Hotel, I luxuriated in my first long sleep since I had left America. Then I went walking, fresh from weeks in the Holy Land. Immediately my attention was struck by the mannerisms and attire of the Lebanese women. In the Holy Land, there had been the very modest, very feminine Arabian women. And there was this sudden contrast of the half-French, half-Arab Lebanese women who projected in their dress and street manners more liberty, more boldness. I saw clearly the obvious European influence upon the Lebanese culture. It showed me how any country's moral strength or its moral weakness is quickly measurable by the street attire and attitude of its women, especially its young women. Wherever the spiritual values have been submerged, if not destroyed, by an emphasis upon the material things, invariably the women reflected. Witness the women, both young and old, in America, where scarcely any moral values are left. There seems in most countries to be either one extreme or the other. Truly a paradise could exist wherever material progress and spiritual values could be properly balanced. I spoke of the University of Beirut, the truth of the American black man's condition. I previously made the comment that any experienced public speaker can feel his audience's reactions. As I spoke, I felt the subjective and defensive reactions of the American white students present. But gradually their hostilities lessened as I continued to present the unassailable facts. But the students of African heritage, well, I'll never get over how the African displays his emotions. Later, with astonishment, I heard that the American press carried stories that my Beirut speech caused a riot. What kind of a riot? I don't know how any reporter in good conscience could have cabled that across the ocean. The Beirut Daily Star front-page report of my speech mentioned no riot, because there was none. When I was done, the African students all but besieged me for autographs. Some of them even hugged me. Never have even American Negro audiences accepted me as I've been accepted time and again by the less inhibited, more down-to-earth Africans. From Beirut, I flew back to Cairo, and there I took a train to Alexandria, Egypt. I kept my camera busy during each brief stopover. Finally, I was on a plane to Nigeria. During the 6-hour flight, when I was not talking with the pilot, who had been a 1960 Olympic swimmer, I sat with a passionately political African. He almost shouted in his fervor, "When people are in a stagnant state and are being brought out of it, there is no time for voting." His central theme was that no new African nation trying to decolonize itself needed any political system that would permit division and bickering. The people don't know what the vote means. It is the job of the enlightened leaders to raise the people's intellect. In Lagos, I was greeted by Professor Essien Udom of the Ibadan University. We were both happy to see each other. We'd met in the United States as he had researched the Nation of Islam for his book, Black Nationalism. At his home that evening, a dinner was held in my honor, attended by other professors and professional people. As we ate, a young doctor asked me if I knew that New York City's press was highly upset about a recent killing in Harlem of a white woman, for which, according to the press, many were blaming me, at least indirectly. An elderly white couple who owned a Harlem clothing store had been attacked by several young Negroes, and the wife was stabbed to death. Some of these young Negroes, apprehended by the police, had described themselves as belonging to an organization they called Blood Brothers. These youths, allegedly, had said or implied that they were affiliated with black Muslims who had split away from the Nation of Islam to join up with me. I told the dinner guests that it was my first word of any of it, but that I was not surprised when violence happened in any of America's ghettos where black men had been living packed like animals and treated like lepers. I said that the charge against me was typical white man scapegoat seeking, that whenever something white men disliked happened in the black community, typically white public attention was directed not at the cause, but at a selected scapegoat. As for the blood brothers, I said I considered all Negroes to be my blood brothers. I said that the white man's efforts to make my name poison actually succeeded only in making millions of black people regard me like Joe Louis. Speaking in the Ibadan University's Trenchard Hall, I urged that Africa's independent nations needed to see the necessity of helping to bring the Afro-Americans' case before the United Nations. I said that just as the American Jew is in political, economic, and cultural harmony with world Jewry, I was convinced that it was time for all Afro-Americans to join the world's Pan-Africanists. I said that physically we Afro-Americans might remain in America, fighting for our constitutional rights, but that philosophically and culturally we Afro-Americans badly needed to return to Africa and to develop a working unity in the framework of Pan-Africanism. Young Africans asked me politically sharper questions than one hears from most American adults. Then an astonishing thing happened when one old West Indian stood and began attacking me for attacking America. "Shut up! Shut up!" students yelled, booing and hissing. The old West Indian tried to express defiance of them, and in a sudden rush a group of students sprang up and were after him. He barely escaped ahead of them. I never saw anything like it. Screaming at him, they ran him off the campus. Later I found out that the old West Indian was married to a white woman, and he was trying to get a job in some white-influenced agency which had put him up to challenge me. Then I understood his problem. This wasn't the last time I'd see the Africans' almost fanatic expression of their political emotions. Afterward, in the Students' Union, I was plied with questions, and I was made an honorary member of the Nigerian Muslim Students' Society. Right here in my wallet is my card. Hajj Malcolm X, registration number M138. With the membership, I was given a new name, Omowale. It means in the Yoruba language, the son who has come home. I meant it when I told them I had never received a more treasured honor. 600 members of the Peace Corps were in Nigeria, I learned. Some white Peace Corps members who talked with me were openly embarrassed at the guilt of their race in America. Among the 20 Negro Peace Corpsmen I talked with, a very impressive fellow to me was Larry Jackson, a Morgan State College graduate from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, who had joined the Peace Corps in 1962. I made Nigerian radio and television program appearances. When I remember seeing black men operating their own communications agencies, a thrill still runs up my spine. The reporters who interviewed me included an American Negro from Newsweek magazine. His name was Williams. Traveling through Africa, he had recently interviewed Prime Minister Nkrumah. Talking with me privately, one group of Nigerian officials told me how skillfully the U.S. Information Agency sought to spread among Africans the impression that American Negroes were steadily advancing and that the race problem soon would be solved. One high official told me, "Our informed leaders and many, many others know otherwise." He said that behind the diplomatic front of every African UN official was recognition of the white man's gigantic duplicity and conspiracy to keep the world's peoples of African heritage separated, both physically and ideologically, from each other. In your land, how many black people think about it that South and Central and North America contain over 80 million people of African descent? He asked me. The world's course will change the day the African heritage peoples come together as brothers. I never had heard that kind of global black thinking from any black man in America. From Lagos, Nigeria, I flew on to Accra, Ghana. I think that nowhere is the black continent's wealth and the natural beauty of its people richer than in Ghana, which is so proudly the very fountainhead of Pan-Africanism. I stepped off the plane into a jarring note. A red-faced American white man recognized me. He had the nerve to come up, grabbing my hand and telling me in a molasses drawl that he was from Alabama, and then he invited me to his home for dinner. My hotel's dining room when I went to breakfast was full of more of those whites, discussing Africa's untapped wealth as though the African waiters had no ears. It nearly ruined my meal, thinking how in America they sicked police dogs on black people and threw bombs in black churches while blocking the doors of their white churches, and now once again in the land where their forefathers had stolen blacks and thrown them into slavery was that white man. Right there at my Ghanaian breakfast table was where I made up my mind that as long as I was in Africa, every time I opened my mouth, I was going to make things hot for that white man, grinning through his teeth, wanting to exploit Africa again. It had been her human wealth the last time. Now he wanted Africa's mineral wealth. And I knew that my reacting as I did presented no conflict with the convictions of brotherhood which I'd gained in the Holy Land. The Muslims of white complexions who had changed my opinions were men who had showed me that they practiced genuine brotherhood. And I knew that any American white man with a genuine brotherhood for a black man was hard to find, no matter how much he grinned. The author, Julian Mayfield, seemed to be the leader of Ghana's little colony of Afro-American expatriates. When I telephoned Mayfield, in what seemed no time at all, I was sitting in his home, surrounded by about 40 black American expatriates. They had been waiting for my arrival. There were business and professional people, such as the militant former Brooklynites, Dr. and Mrs. Robert E. Lee, both of them dentists who had given up their United States citizenship. Such others as Alice Wyndham, Maya Angelou Marke, Victoria Garvin, and Leslie Lacey had even formed a Malcolm X committee to guide me through a whirlwind calendar of appearances and social events.
Context of White Supremacy. We are in the middle of Chapter 18. If you are following along, middle of Chapter 18, where we'll pick up at for the second audio segment. The number, if folks would like to participate, 760-569-7676. The code is 564943 pound. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. That number again, 760-569-7676. The code is 564943 pound. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. If you would like to use the free flash phone, it should be linked at Black Talk Radio Network. If you need the address, it is tiny, TINY.cc/1 race, and that is the number 1. That address one more time is tiny, TINY.cc/1 race, and that is the number 1. Once you put in that address, look on the left side of the page. You'll see a link. It says free flash phone. Click it. It will open a small window on your screen. The first line, it is a drop-down menu. Select the number that I just gave out, which again is 760-569-7676. The next line, it will ask for the code. That code again, 564943. Final line, it will ask for a name. Nickname, real name, whatever you're comfortable with, random keys, whatever. Once you get all that information entered, click the green button at the bottom. It will connect you to the live broadcast. You should be able to hear us. It is free, works anywhere in the world. Same procedure if you would like to participate. You'll see the dial pad on your screen. Press *6. You'll hear the audio prompt to press 1, and you will be on the switchboard. We can get you on the line. With that, folks who dialed in with a hand up, your line should be open. I guess I'll add quickly the audio clip that you heard at the beginning where Minister Malcolm X was talking about non-violence and the March on Washington. That was from June of 1964, so it's kind of right in the timeline of where we are in the book. But June 1964 was where that commentary was from. Everyone with a hand up, your line should be open.
Greetings.
Greetings. Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Yes, sir. Okay, starting with, I was thinking, and I question whether the people that Minister Malcolm saw were actually white to people who are classified as white. I kind of like wondering on. I mean, he may have considered them to be, like white people. Or, I can't quote exactly how he phrased it. And I've read the book many times before, and he wrote that letter to his wife, which went viral, so to speak. I guess that word wasn't associated that way back during that time, but it definitely went viral. Of course, white people were going to use it to their benefit, but I doubt that most or all of those people were not classified as white by white people. Apparently, he met a lot of people in a non-volatile environment who have a culture of being courteous within that particular environment called the pilgrimage to Mecca. I had a small experience like that I probably, what I will always remember when I attended the Million Man March, during that short period of time. I'm not saying it's on the same scale of a pilgrimage to Mecca, but when he was describing on what he went through for those few hours that the Million Man March, I saw some similarities taking place in the city of Washington, D.C. Number 3, he being treated as a celebrity. He literally ended up being treated like a celebrity. I think he was overwhelmed. You can almost feel it with on how things were being described. That this whirlwind of being captured up and whizzed from here to there, driven in front of people who were walking, so and so. And it was just, I would figure it would be overwhelming to me also, but where he was kind of like, treated like a celebrity within that particular environment. And I got a question. I spent a great deal, about 15 minutes, looking for my word guidebook to see what Mr. Fuller may have had about the word orthodox. At the least, I think that word, if it's going to be spoken, it should be spoken with caution. The word orthodox, and within the autobiography, he used it. It's been used in the context of what version, quote unquote, of a quote unquote religion and how it should be practiced. I suspect with that word orthodox, it is something that's going to be acceptable to white people. I suspect. I could be wrong, but it sounds very close to, well, this is the way you should do it, because from that, either white people would agree with it or they at least would accept it. The word orthodox. With the, I don't know what that is when it comes to a religion, because, far as I know through history, right now as we speak, Muslims are killing Muslims. People who and I'll figure on both factions, both of them go to Mecca to practice that pilgrimage. That's right there. Who end up as soon as it's over with, within a matter of small time, they kill one another. And the same thing with other quote unquote religions. What else I have here? I believe that Minister Malcolm also was learning about the refined level of white supremacy firsthand when he went out of this environment for the second time. He actually had been out out of the country years before, representing Minister Elijah Muhammad. I believe in 1958. I could be wrong. I think it was also expressed in the autobiography, where he actually went out of the country to represent Mr. Muhammad. But this particular time, he really got the chance to really study within his own independent thinking process, and was getting an eye, an ear, and mind full. For some reason, Minister Malcolm's understanding of white supremacy on a global basis was not illustrated so far in the book, except maybe, I guess we haven't gotten to it yet, that is going to be expressed in the book. I'm not questioning Minister Malcolm, because I know he had an understanding of it. But I guess later on in the book he's going to talk about his experience in England. And I know he's going to talk about his experience in France, because most of this criticism has only been on white people in this part of the world. I have down here, as opposed to, and maybe that was his intent, to expose to the non-white world about racist man, woman, and child in this part of the world. Maybe that was his mission. I didn't hear it exactly expressed in that way. But apparently that's what I'm digesting it as such. That's what he's doing, because through a lot of the international negotiations that goes on, he's registering that racist white man and woman and child is kind of like upheld in a constructive and positive manner in other places in the world, and which it is that is a confusing shield that white people in this part of the world impress upon other places, and he was going about the task of kind of like shattering that false image. Thank you for listening.
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay, greetings, Gus. Greetings to the callers. I want to get my little bit in quickly. It seems as though Malcolm X, when he was visiting Mecca, he was overwhelmed by the hospitality and the courtesy that was extended to him. And then the officials, relaying to him that, the only way that racism or prejudice or any type of unfair treatment had entered into their area, it would be because of Western influence. And then I got to thinking about Western Hemisphere influence and what that really means. West of what? And then we come to a conclusion that they meant white people and the influence that white people had upon this particular place on the planet. And then Malcolm, when he was there, it seemed as though his commentary softened a bit. He did not have the condemnation against the white man that he had previously been preaching and illustrating to black Americans throughout America. But then you can think about the fact that it was a new beginning for him. He was starting to see things in a different light. But then I like to say that whether it's Allah, God, Jesus Christ, whatever religious divine entity that you want to identify, it seems as though they cannot control the actions of white people. And so white people have continuously terrorized non-white people in the absence of any intervention, divine intervention, from either Allah, God, Jesus, any of the divine entities that we know of. So it's just surprising to me that in the scheme of things, that it didn't dawn upon, a serious thinker that, these people constantly get away with murder. I mean, literally. Not only here in the United States, but globally. And then he even alluded to countries that, have fallen prey to the white man's ways. And then they also mentioned in every civilization or society, the same pattern exists to where the female of that society is assaulted or manipulated in some type of way, so that makes that society vulnerable to the influences of the West. And it would just seem like after so many times the same thing happening, that you should be able to become aware of this pattern and then work against what's actually happening. So we bring ourselves to the plight of the black Americans in the United States, which is, for hundreds of years has been a pitiful plight. But then if you look at the progress as far as elected officials or using the vote or enacting a bill that may bring some improvement to an individual people, then we have tried all of that. We have, excelled in all those areas. But yet and still, from 100 years or 50 years, from the introducing a bill, so let's say the Civil Rights Bill or the Voting Rights Bill, we're still in the same predicament that we were in 50, 60 years earlier. So there is no progress. But then I like to lastly say that King Farad or Prasad, the person that he held in the most highest regard, even they were susceptible to the powers of white supremacy. And you can fool yourself to whatever degree you want to, but when you sit around and think about it, they all fall under subjection of white supremacy, racism. I'll mute my line. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Mr. Demery. Any other folks who haven't shared yet?
Good evening, everyone. It's Carmen. Well, first of all, I'm just glad for this book. This is good. I've never read it before. And just to hear about all of these people in history is great. I'm going to have to look everyone up. I was thinking about the customs. I guess he was detained by customs, and they didn't torture him or threaten him or harass him. They just stuck him over in that room with everyone, and they offered him food. There was food available, and I guess he could go to the bathroom whenever he wanted to, freely wander around in the customs area, and I just like customs is nothing like that now. It's just, first of all, they torture you. They certainly won't let you bathe, and they isolate you, and it's just, that kind of customs is amazing to me, because I'm just now realizing that every awful, evil thing that white people have ever done to me, I am still in recovery from. I said, I am still in recovery from customs. I was amazed by that. Customs has really changed, but I think this is 1963. So, and then another thing, because whatever white people do to you, you're probably always still going to be in recovery because you never get treated. So, I'm thinking he keeps doing the same thing over and over again, because in this part of the book where he says, when I said earlier, he just gave himself to Elijah Muhammad. Because, he was nothing. It's like he was saying, I was nothing. I was nothing. And for no reason, he picked me up and made me somebody. And, I say that's something that if you want to advance for forever, go find someone who is on the ground, who has been beat down totally, who has nothing, and lift them up and dust them up, and they will be your lieutenant forever. And he's doing the same thing again, Elijah Muhammad has tried to get him assassinated already, and so now he's in Africa, the Middle East. Well, he's in Africa, and he's saying stuff like that white man, or at least he would have been considered white in America, had given up his suite to me for my he had nothing to gain. He didn't need me. He had everything. He had more to lose than to gain. If he did that, he knew there was only stigma attached to me. I was supposed to have horns. I was a racist. I was anti-white. And from all appearances, he was white. And then he goes, he says, I couldn't say in my mind that these were white men, while the men acted as if they were brothers of mine. The elder Dr. Azam, as if he was my father. His father was God. I felt like he was my father. And I think he's doing that same thing again. Whenever he's all the way down, whoever picks him up and dusts him off, he just becomes, just loyal to them forever. And it's not as if they didn't want anything. Because, it said in the book, he's saying, they didn't want anything, but they said it a couple of times. They said, I hope you will become a great preacher of Islam in America. That's the same thing they want of the preachers here. We want you to be great preachers, guys. We're going to take care of you. We're going to give you stuff. You're going to be exalted. We just want you to be a fabulous preacher. That's it. But that's not saying nothing, And the last thing, he kind of gave an aside, while I prayed for my wife and my kids. And they are conspicuously absent from the book. And it's just like, when you're in the house and you're reading and it's really, and all of a sudden you realize, you're having a great time and it's really quiet, and then you know that something's wrong because you can't hear the children. when other people are invisible, there's always something wrong. You know, and he didn't even realize that the women were missing from his Hajj until he got to Lebanon. And that lets me know that there's something wrong there. People aren't missing unless there's something wrong when you know that they are there. They should be seen. So, you know, I won't go into that too much. But anyway, he seems like he's repeating a pattern. So that's it.
Anybody else with a hand up who has not shared?
Ma'am, you heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, Gus, and good evening to the callers and the listeners. I just have one observation. When he went from Mecca to Lebanon, he noticed the difference in the way the women looked. And he said that being that the Lebanese women were a mixture of Arab and French, that you can definitely see a European influence in their appearance. And he said that you could tell a lot about a place by the way the women look. So I thought that was very interesting. And that's all I had. I'll mute my line.
Anybody else who we have not heard from have a comment they wanted to get in? Alrighty. If you're listening in and have anything you want to share, you can feel free to do so. We have about 25 minutes before we get to the second audio segment. Some of the comments, observations that I made, I did hear fair in there. Watch that word fair. The word orthodox is not in the word guide, but the word original is in the word guide, Mr. Fuller's word guide. And it is listed as a use with caution. So I feel that would probably be the same for the term orthodox. Use with caution, ask questions. Next, I thought that was a great observation as well, I think from firefighter in Florida about the people that he was seeing in Mecca. And throughout his sojourn, perhaps some of these folks that he thought were white, maybe they weren't really white. Or maybe they would not be accepted as white by other individuals who are accepted as and classify themselves as white. I think that's definitely a valid point. It's been my observation that black people tend to make a lot of false positives with white people, and that is we identify somebody as a white person, and it turns out that individuals who are accepted as classified as white do not accept that person as white. I think there are a lot of illustrations of that as part of the confusion of white supremacy. Other observations I had in terms of his international critique, I don't think and when we say international critique in terms of the conduct of white people in other parts of the world, not just white people in the U.S., but white people in other areas geographically. I'm not sure we've had as much of it in the book, but I know Carl Evans' book, The Judas Factor, great book. I've already read it. If I had a physical copy in my hand, I'd read a few passages, but his book focuses a lot on Minister Malcolm's international critique of racism, white supremacy. Like he has a whole chapter where he talks about Patrice Lumumba in the Congo and the global racist collective that led to his assassination and what took place in the area of the world known as the Congo and Vietnam. That's one thing I definitely would have to get a strong critique in. I just read Tavis Smiley's book, Death of a King, where he focuses on Dr. King's last year and the flack that he got from a lot of black people and definitely white people in critiquing Vietnam, the conflict in Vietnam, and saying that that was just another aspect of white supremacy on a global level. And I hear a lot of people, they give credit to Dr. King for his commentary on Vietnam. It is correct. He absolutely did make a great critique. However, I hear people say that Dr. King was saying this publicly in 67, 68, last year or so of his life. You can find speeches where Minister Malcolm was laying out a very precise critique of the conflict in Vietnam as an extension of white supremacy. And I don't hear people give him the same credit for being so far ahead of the curve. I mean, this is 64 that he's saying this. I mean, this is like, this is the type of thing that gets you called in front of the House on Un-American Activities Committee in 64. Like, this is way before it became fashionable, and you had whites at Kent State and other places saying that they were beatniks, and Student for Democratic Society saying, we're against the war and we're not going blah, blah, way before that amount of time when he was saying. In fact, I would even say if people think, and it is theorized, Dr. King's commentary on Vietnam led to him being assassinated, well, just double that for Minister Malcolm, because he was saying this years before anybody else got to it. And I don't know what that is. If other people do hear him credited for being way, way out front in terms of his analysis of Vietnam as an extension of white supremacy, please correct me, but that is something I've been curious about for quite some time. Next observation, his sense of being overwhelmed by the kindness. I thought that was a great comment in terms of this area. They just have a code for being courteous here, which is a bit of a deviation. I think under this system, and I mean at this time where there are hits on him, Minister Malcolm, people threatening to take his life and the danger that he lived with, even as he traveled internationally, the danger that he encountered, being poisoned at one point, and various incidents that he describes. I think that if you go from that environment to an environment where, as was stated, he's being treated like a celebrity, and you're getting put up in all these posh hotels and getting to speak with all these important figures and prime ministers and leaders of different areas, I would think that would have a big impact. And the fact that he's making his Hajj. This is a spiritual experience. And I think for most people, if you're sincerely vested, right, like you're really going to do your best in terms of trying to experience this and get the most out of it, I think it would be very challenging to be in that space and still holding a white man is the devil type analysis. Like, I've not done a pilgrimage, but it just, to me, it would seem if you're really in that space and you're trying to connect, everybody is one and we're all blah, 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 and you got all these people engaged in all this, and you really want to be authentically a part, and you're in a vulnerable position. Not to mention you're doing this and you had to borrow money to get there, and then you're depending on these people, you're getting stopped at customs, and anything could go wrong on this. So, I mean, you're really in a weak position, vulnerable, putting yourself in a very vulnerable position to do this. I could see how it would be very challenging to have that same sort of uncompromising analysis of whites, but maybe I am misinterpreting. Final thing I wanted to get in, some of the other tidbits I picked out from the book. I thought the line about the quote-unquote West Indian that was challenging him, who ended up being in a tragic arrangement with a white woman, again, that I have run into that before. I thought it was very important when he said the American black leaders, and he has leaders in quotes, most critical problem is lack of imagination. Lack of imagination. His thinking, his strategies, if any, are always limited, at least basically, to only that which is either advised or approved by the white man and woman. And the first thing the American power structure doesn't want any Negroes to start is thinking internationally. I would still maintain that is every aspect of that is super true. Having imagination, very important towards solving this problem, because we're going to have to do some things that haven't been done before, and thinking globally, not just about racism, white supremacy, but just being informed and thinking on a global scale. I think that's part of the definition of niggerish, is small thinking, which racists love to keep us in a very small-minded way of being. I appreciated his codification. Qasim Gulick asked me why I had broken with Elijah Muhammad. I said that I preferred not to elaborate upon our differences in the interests of preserving the American black man's unity, They both understood and accepted that. Phenomenal codification. Phenomenal codification right there, in my opinion. Let's see, I might share one more and then check to see if other folks have things they want to get in. Oh man, yeah, there were quite a few that stood out. I'm skipping over some. Oh man, I'll get this one in, and then I'll where he says the American Negro never can be blamed for his racial animosities. He's only reacting to 400 years of the conscious racism of the American whites. But as racism leads America up the suicide path, I do believe from the experiences that I have had with them, that the whites of the younger generation in the colleges and universities will see the handwriting on the wall, and many of them will turn to the spiritual path of truth, the only way left to America to ward off the disaster that racism inevitably must lead to. Now that right there, man, I would say that shows a staple aspect of white supremacy, where for whatever reason, we consistently look at white children and think, oh man, they're going to be the ones that are not racist. This is the generation of the crop of whites that are going to get this done, and they will be tired of beating niggers. And it never, ever happens. You hear that same rhetoric now, inaccurate understanding of what it means to be white, where people right now are saying it's the young whites, this generation, the millennials, they're not right. I can only conclude that must be some facet of how we are groomed to think of whites, and just another way that we scapegoat and get out of accurately assessing what it means to be white and functioning with them in a correct, logical manner if you have enemies. I will stop there, even though there were other things that stood out. If there are any folks who are on the line who haven't shared, you can feel free to do so. And then I was just going to ask in general what people thought of his seeming change of view, that whites are the devil, to then maybe they're not all so bad. Is there anybody with us who has not shared at all? Your line is open. We'll do that first.
Hello?
Yes.
Oh, can I be heard?
I can hear you, Thomas, in New York. You said you needed a moment. Oh, okay. No problem. We'll catch you in a second. We'll see if you're in a quieter place. The other caller, 5234, we can hear you as well, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hello, good evening, everybody. Good evening, Gus. This is Ross calling in for the first time. I've been listening for a little while, but I missed the beginning of the show. There were two good points that you brought up that I just wanted to speak about. In reference to Carl Evans' books, I would suggest every black person who wants to have any understanding of what really happened to Malcolm, that's the book to get. And there's also a documentary by Zach Kondo. It's a two-part documentary where he also goes into detail about his assassination. That's also very, very well written. A couple of things I wanted to bring up. In reference to his trip to Mecca, one of the things that prompted him to go on that trip was actually Dr. Bain, who recently passed away, God rest his soul, and Dr. John Henry Clark. They were two of his closest friends, and they informed him that the Nation of Islam's version of Islam was not true Islam. And through them teaching him more about history, they pushed him to go to Mecca so that he can see for himself that people of all races were members of the Islamic faith. And a lot of people don't really know that. I'm from New York City, and I'm a student of Dr. Ben, so he would speak about this quite a bit, and Dr. Clark when he was alive. And it's interesting, when you brought up the non-recognition of Malcolm's critique of the Vietnam War, and how not many people really speak about that publicly, it made me think of a quote that Dr. Ben had, and it was, no country gives a holiday to an enemy of the state. And because Malcolm's position and his position in reference to American treatment of African people in America, ultimately he was an enemy of the state. His position of the the antithesis to the nonviolent rhetoric that Dr. King was professing made him dangerous. And ultimately, looking back, Martin's inclination towards integration actually turned out to be the most helpful thing for European people, because they've gotten to carry their plan a lot further along than they would have with the overt racism that we experienced in the past. And ultimately, I would say, with Malcolm's position, there was no way that they would give him a holiday or acknowledge him publicly in any way that would be really positive, unless they could make money off of it, like they did once the movie came out and he started to get, they had made stamps for him. The Postal Service actually made Malcolm X stamps, so they were able to profit off of his image and off of his mystique, let's say. But ultimately, because they could make that money, that was it. And in hindsight now, because integration has done such a number on our people, you know, Martin's way turned out to be more beneficial to them in hindsight. And it's no disrespect to Martin Luther King. It's just the way things turned out to be. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
We'll check to see if Thomas in New York, if he's in a spot where he can actually speak. Oh, it looks like he might have dropped out. Oh, well.
No, I'm muted. I'm here.
Oh, I was saying Thomas in New York. That's a different.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Oh, no need for apology. The caller at 9400, did you have commentary you wanted to add?
Basically, with regards to the young people and Malcolm's looking at white people there in Mecca and expressing hope on both ends, I think that the truth would have came out. But first, you do have to extinguish, give a chance for people to put their best foot forward. And I think that was very wise of him to do that. But eventually, the truth would have came out. Both persons, it's going to be an individual thing. It's not going to be a group. And those persons who want to put their best foot forward and move into justice instead of white supremacy will do so. And those won't, they will show themselves. And I think it was wise of him to open his heart and to say the things that he said. But again, he was a man of truth. Okay, thank you.
We have about 8 minutes. If folks have any commentary about his articulated change in viewpoint on white people, we can close out with that, or unless folks had anything else they wanted to make sure they got in that was important.
If I'm allowed, that's for someone who previously had a comment.
Oh yeah, you can feel free if you have something you want.
Okay. I just wanted to briefly add on, and this is from Dr. Clark, who everybody is understanding he was a close friend of Malcolm X. I believe from this recent reading that we just read, that some of those individuals, the people who were able to put him up in the best of hotels and accommodations, at some point in time, they did offer him lifetime employment, and when the things really started getting hot, and it was, well, there already was, but getting hot to kill him, they offered employment in somewhere in the vicinity of $1 million. I remember looking at Dr. Clark's documentary that came on television years ago, and he was talking about it. They were walking through Harlem, and Malcolm told him about it, and kind of like slapped him on the back and said he turned it down. And I just think, about the whole situation. It's somewhere in the vicinity of $1 million or more that he ended up making. But in hindsight, it may have sustained his life for a little while, but I still think the inevitable would have happened to him. Something similar, I think, happened with Dr. King also, but I specifically remember hearing in Dr. Clark's documentary, and he had to mention about he had a whole segment on Malcolm, and he mentioned about that when they were walking down one of the famous streets in Harlem, and he slapped on the back saying that he wasn't going to accept the offer. Yeah, that's it.
May I add something?
I reckon.
Thank you. As far as the change to white people, before I've said there are two types of white people, even though people don't pay attention. There's white people with pheomelanin and white people who don't have any melanin or have very little melanin. And the white people who don't have any melanin are albinos, and they're not heinous. And the white people who have very little normal, the melanin they have is normal, but so they look like blondes, or they don't have any melanin, and their eyes are blue. But what melanin they have is normal melanin, it's just very little of it, and so they look white. But then there's those white people with pheomelanin, and that's a different thing entirely. You know, it's just, those people behave differently, and you'll hear him say it. He'll say, "Oh, this white Arab and that white Arab," but then when he gets to the people from the U.S., he'll go, "Wow, these people are so red," and it is a completely different molecule, and it behaves differently all throughout the body. It is not just an absence of melanin. It is having something there that works differently. So once you start looking at them, you'll be able to pick it out. You'll be able to see which ones will never be what you think they're going to be. So, I mean, there's a difference in white people. There's a difference. And once you really start looking at the skin and isolate that from all the other features, you'll be able to spot it readily, and you know just how dangerous those people are. You'll be able to see it in their behavior, subtle differences. And that's it.
Three minutes left. Anybody else have comments they wanted to make sure they got in? Last 3 minutes?
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that was an interesting point about white people and the complexity of the skin and the behavioral patterns. Now, when Malcolm X was, out of the country and in the Eastern Hemisphere or, Mecca, he saw a difference. And, he attributed to the ideology and not the complexities of the skin color. But then we also know that, from our studies and even listening to different individuals who have, even Dr. Umar Johnson, who has actually been there and noticed that even the heavily melanated individuals in that particular part of the planet are mistreated and discriminated against and put into servitude type positions. So it's this thing that we want to believe that, there's somewhere, someplace, where we're accepted as human beings, not because of our skin color. We don't have any strikes against us, that we can, there's some place that exists where there's a clean slate and that we're looked upon from the content of our character and not the color of our skin, but, there's overwhelming evidence that there is no place that exists.
Oh, God, thank you for this. Thank you, because we
also know that the heavily melanated individual, whether or not he is classified in a caste system or in a system of underprivileged, then just the fact that that person is heavily melanated, he is discredited, and then it is almost globally, coordinated that they believe this way. So it is a serious, I would say, pathological association with skin color, because of all the brilliant people that were heavily melanated that they disregard and then continuously try to perpetuate this belief that heavily melanated people, are to be disregarded and to be unfairly treated. I'll mute my line.
Right on. I see we had some other folks who got a hand up, but we have to get the second audio segment started so that we have ample time for folks to share on the second side. So Thomas in New York and our caller 5098, we will nab both of you. You all will be the first two people that we go to once the second audio segment concludes. Again, we are in chapter 18, midway through. Feel free, take notes, make sure you don't forget Context of White Supremacy, the autobiography of Malcolm X as told to Alex Haley. The narrator again is Earl Hyman.
In my briefcase, here are some of the African press stories which had appeared when it was learned that I was en route. Malcolm X's name is almost as familiar to Ghanaians as the southern dogs, fire hoses, cattle prods, people sticks, and the ugly, hate-contorted white faces. Malcolm X's decision to enter the mainstream of the struggle heralds a hopeful sign on the sickeningly dismal scene of brutalized, non-violent, passive resistance. An extremely important fact is that Malcolm X is the first Afro-American leader of national standing to make an independent trip to Africa since Dr. Du Bois came to Ghana. This may be the beginning of a new phase in our struggle. Let's make sure we don't give it less thought than the State Department is doubtless giving it right now. And another. Malcolm X is one of our most significant and militant leaders. We are in a battle. Efforts will be made to malign and discredit him. I simply couldn't believe this kind of reception 5,000 miles from America. The officials of the press had even arranged to pay my hotel expenses, and they would hear no objection that I made. They included T.D. Bafor, the editor-in-chief of the Ghanaian Times, G.T. Anim, the managing director of the Ghana News Agency, Kofi Batsa, the editor of Spark and the Secretary-General of the Pan-African Union of Journalists, and Mr. Cameron Duodu, and others. I could only thank them all. Then, during the beautiful dinner which had been prepared by Julian Mayfield's pretty Puerto Rican wife, Ana Livia, she was in charge of Accra's district health program, I was plied with questions by the eagerly interested black expatriates from America who had returned to Mother Africa. I can only wish that every American black man could have shared my ears, my eyes, and my emotions throughout the round of engagements which had been made for me in Ghana. And my point in saying this is not the reception that I personally received as an individual of whom they had heard, but it was the reception tendered to me as the symbol of the militant American black man, as I had the honor to be regarded. At a jam-packed press club conference, I believe the very first question was why had I split with Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. The Africans had heard such rumors as that Elijah Muhammad had built a palace in Arizona. I straightened out that falsehood, and I avoided any criticism. I said that our disagreement had been in terms of political direction and involvement in the extra-religious struggle for human rights. I said I respected the Nation of Islam for its having been a psychologically revitalizing movement and a source of moral and social reform, and that Elijah Muhammad's influence upon the American black man had been basic. I stressed to the assembled press the need for mutual communication and support between the Africans and Afro-Americans whose struggles were interlocked. I remember that in the press conference I used the word Negro, and I was firmly corrected. The word is not favored here, Mr. Malcolm X. The term Afro-American has greater meaning and dignity. I sincerely apologized. I don't think that I said Negro again as long as I was in Africa. I said that the 22 million Afro-Americans in the United States could become for Africa a great positive force, while in turn the African nations could and should exert positive force at diplomatic levels against America's racial discrimination. I said, all of Africa unites in opposition to South Africa's apartheid and to the oppression in the Portuguese territories. But you waste your time if you don't realize that Verwoerd and Salazar and Britain and France never could last a day if it were not for United States support. So until you expose the man in Washington, D.C., you haven't accomplished anything. I knew that the State Department's G. Menon Williams was officially visiting in Africa. I said, take my word for it, you be suspicious of all these American officials who come to Africa grinning in your faces when they don't grin in ours back home. I told them that my own father was murdered by whites in the state of Michigan, where G. Menon Williams once was the governor. I was honored at the Ghana Club by more press representatives and dignitaries. I was the guest at the home of the late black American author Richard Wright's daughter, beautiful, slender, soft-voiced Julia, whose young French husband publishes a Ghanaian paper. Later in Paris, I was to meet Richard Wright's widow, Ellen, and a younger daughter, Rachel. I talked with ambassadors at their embassies. The Algerian ambassador impressed me as a man who was dedicated totally to militancy and to world revolution, as the way to solve the problems of the world's oppressed masses. His perspective was attuned not just to Algerians, but to include the Afro-Americans and all others anywhere who were oppressed. The Chinese ambassador, Mr. Huang Ha, a most perceptive and also most militant man, focused upon the efforts of the West to divide Africans from the peoples of African heritage elsewhere. The Nigerian ambassador was deeply concerned about the Afro-Americans' plight in America. He had personal knowledge of their suffering, having lived and studied in Washington, D.C. Similarly, the most sympathetic Mali ambassador had been in New York at the United Nations. I breakfasted with Dr. McConnell of British Guiana. We discussed the need for the type of Pan-African unity that would also include the Afro-Americans. And I had a talk in depth about Afro-American problems with Nana Nketia, the Ghanaian Minister of Culture. Once, when I returned to my hotel, a New York City call was waiting for me from Mal Good of the American Broadcasting Company. Over the telephone, Mal Good asked me questions that I answered for his beeping tape recorder about the Blood Brothers in Harlem, the rifle clubs for Negroes, and other subjects with which I was being kept identified in the American press. In the University of Ghana's Great Hall, I addressed the largest audience that I would in Africa, mostly Africans, but also numerous whites. Before this audience, I tried my best to demolish the false image of American race relations that I knew was spread by the U.S. Information Agency. I tried to impress upon them all the true picture of the Afro-Americans' plight at the hands of the white man. I worked on those whites there in the audience. I've never seen so many whites so nice to so many blacks as you white people here in Africa. In America, Afro-Americans are struggling for integration. They should come here, to Africa, and see how you grin at Africans. You've really got integration here. But can you tell the Africans that in America you grin at the black people? No, you can't. And you don't honestly like these Africans any better either. But what you do like is the minerals Africa has under her soil. Those whites out in the audience turned pink and red. They knew I was telling the truth. I'm not anti-American, and I didn't come here to condemn America. I want to make that very clear, I told them. I came here to tell the truth. And if the truth condemns America, then she stands condemned. One evening I met most of the officials in Ghana, all of those with whom I'd previously talked, and more, at a party that was given for me by the Honorable Kofi Bako, the Ghanaian Minister of Defense and the leader of the National Assembly. I was told that this was the first time such an honor was accorded to a foreigner since Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois had come to Ghana. There was music, dancing, and fine Ghanaian food. Several persons at the party were laughing among themselves, saying that at an earlier party that day, U.S. Ambassador Mahomey was knocking himself out being exceptionally friendly and jovial. Some thought that he was making a strong effort to counteract the truth about America that I was telling every chance I got. Then an invitation came to me which exceeded my wildest dream. I would never have imagined that I would actually have an opportunity to address the members of the Ghanaian Parliament. I made my remarks brief, but I made them strong. How can you condemn Portugal and South Africa while our black people in America are being bitten by dogs and beaten with clubs? I said I felt certain that the only reason black Africans, our black brothers, could be so silent about what happened in America was that they had been misinformed by the American government's propaganda agencies. At the end of my talk I heard, "Yes, we support the Afro-American, morally, physically, materially if necessary, in Ghana or in all of black Africa." My highest single honor was an audience at the castle with Osegiefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. Before seeing him, I was searched most thoroughly. I respected the type of security the Ghanaians erect around their leader. It gave me that much more respect for independent black men. Then, as I entered Dr. Nkrumah's long office, he came out from behind his desk at the far end. Dr. Nkrumah wore ordinary dress, his hand was extended, and a smile was on his sensitive face. I pumped his hand. We sat on a couch and talked. I knew that he was particularly well informed on the Afro-American's plight, as for years he had lived and studied in America. We discussed the unity of Africans and peoples of African descent. We agreed that Pan-Africanism was the key also to the problems of those of African heritage. I could feel the warm, likable, and very down-to-earth qualities of Dr. Nkrumah. My time with him was up all too soon. I promised faithfully that when I returned to the United States, I would relay to Afro-Americans his personal, warm regards. That afternoon, 39 miles away in Winneba, I spoke at the Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute, where 200 students were being trained to carry forward Ghana's intellectual revolution, and here again occurred one of those astounding demonstrations of the young African's political fervor. After I'd spoken, during the question and answer period, some young Afro-American stood up whom none there seemed to know. "I am an American Negro," he announced himself. Vaguely, he defended the American white man. The African students booed and harassed him. Then instantly, when the meeting was over, they cornered this fellow with verbal abuse. "Are you an agent of Rockefeller? Stop corrupting our children." The fellow had turned out to be a local secondary school teacher placed in the job by an American agency. "Come to this institute for some orientation." Temporarily, a teacher rescued the fellow, but then the students rushed him and drove him away, shouting, "Stooge! CIA! American agent!" Chinese ambassador and Mrs. Huang Hua gave a state dinner in my honor. The guests included the Cuban and the Algerian ambassadors, and also it was here that I met Mrs. W.E.B. Du Bois. After the excellent dinner, 3 films were shown. One, a color film, depicted the People's Republic of China in celebration of its 14th anniversary. Prominently shown in this film was the militant former North Carolina Afro-American Robert Williams, who has since taken refuge in Cuba after his advocacy that the American black people should take up arms to defend and protect themselves. The second film focused upon the Chinese people's support for the Afro-American struggle. Chairman Mao Zedong was shown delivering his statement of that support, and the film offered sickening moments of graphic white brutality, police and civilian, to Afro-Americans who were demonstrating in various U.S. cities seeking civil rights. And the final film was a dramatic presentation of the Algerian Revolution. The Malcolm X committee rushed me from the Chinese embassy dinner to where a soiree in my honor had already begun, at the Press Club. It was my first sight of Ghanaians dancing the high life. A high and merry time was being had by everyone, and I was pressed to make a short speech. I stressed again the need for unity between Africans and Afro-Americans. I cried out of my heart, "Now dance, sing, but as you do, remember Mandela, remember Sobokwe, remember Lumumba in his grave, remember South Africans now in jail." I said, "You wonder why I don't dance? because I want you to remember 22 million Afro-Americans in the U.S. But I sure felt like dancing. The Ghanaians performed the high life as if possessed. One pretty African girl sang Blue Moon like Sarah Vaughan. Sometimes the band sounded like Milt Jackson, sometimes like Charlie Parker. The next morning, Saturday, I heard that Cassius Clay and his entourage had arrived. There was a huge reception for him at the airport. I thought that if Cassius and I happened to meet, it would likely prove embarrassing for Cassius, since he had elected to remain with Elijah Muhammad's version of Islam. I would not have been embarrassed, but I knew that Cassius would have been forbidden to associate with me. I knew that Cassius knew I had been with him, and for him, and believed in him, when those who later embraced him felt that he had no chance. I decided to avoid Cassius, so as not to put him on the spot. A luncheon was given for me that afternoon by the Nigerian High Commissioner, His Excellency Alhaji Isa Wali, a short, bespectacled, extremely warm and friendly man who had lived in Washington, D.C. for 2 years. After lunch, His Excellency spoke to the guests of his American encounters with discrimination, and the friendships he had made with Afro-Americans, and he reaffirmed the bonds between Africans and Afro-Americans. His Excellency held up before the luncheon guests a large and handsome issue of an American magazine, Horizon. It was open to an article about the Nation of Islam written by Dr. Mauro Berger of Princeton University. One full page was a photograph of me. The opposite full page was a beautiful color illustration of a black royal Nigerian Muslim, stalwart and handsome, of hundreds of years ago. When I look at these photographs, I know these two people are one, said His Excellency. The only difference is in their attire, and one was born in America, and the other in Africa. So, to let everyone know that I believe we are brothers, I am going to give to Alhaji Malcolm X a robe like that worn by the Nigerian in this photo. I was overwhelmed by the splendor of the beautiful blue robe and the orange turban which His Excellency then presented to me. I bent over so that he, a short man, could properly arrange the turban on my head. His Excellency Alhaji Isa Wali also presented me with a 2-volume translation of the Holy Koran. After this unforgettable luncheon, Mrs. Shirley Graham Du Bois drove me to her home, so that I could see and photograph the home where her famed late husband, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, had spent his last days. Mrs. Du Bois, a writer, was the director of Ghanaian television, which was planned for educational purposes. When Dr. Du Bois had come to Ghana, she told me, Dr. Nkrumah had set up the aging great militant Afro-American scholar like a king, giving to Dr. Du Bois everything he could wish for. Mrs. Du Bois told me that when Dr. Du Bois was failing fast, Dr. Nkrumah had visited, and the two men had said goodbye, both knowing that one's death was near. And Dr. Nkrumah had gone away in tears. My final Ghanaian social event was a beautiful party in my honor given by His Excellency Mr. Armando Entralgo Gonzalez, the Cuban ambassador to Ghana. The next morning, it was Sunday, the Malcolm X committee was waiting in my hotel to accompany me to the airport. As we left the hotel, we met Cassius Clay with some of his entourage returning from his morning walk. Cassius momentarily seemed uncertain. Then he spoke, something almost monosyllabic, like, "How are you?" It flashed through my mind how close we had been before the fight that had changed the course of his life. I replied that I was fine, something like that, and that I hoped he was, which I sincerely meant. Later on, I sent Cassius a message by wire, saying that I hoped that he would realize how much he was loved by Muslims wherever they were, and that he would not let anyone use him and maneuver him into saying and doing things to tarnish his image. The Malcolm X committee and I were exchanging goodbyes at the Accra airport when a small motorcade of 5 ambassadors arrived to see me off. I no longer had any words. In the plane, bound for Monrovia, Liberia, to spend a day, I knew that after what I had experienced in the Holy Land, the second most indelible memory I would carry back to America would be the Africa, seething with serious awareness of itself, and of Africa's wealth, and of her power, and of her destined role in the world. From Monrovia, I flew to Dakar, Senegal. The Senegalese in the airport, hearing about the Muslim from America, stood in line to shake my hand, and I signed many autographs. "Our people can't speak Arabic, but we have Islam in our hearts," said one Senegalese. I told them that exactly described their fellow Afro-American Muslims. From Dakar I flew to Morocco, where I spent a day sightseeing. I visited the famous Casbah, the ghetto which had resulted when the ruling white French wouldn't let the dark-skinned natives into certain areas of Casablanca. Thousands upon thousands of the subjugated natives were crowded into the ghetto, in the same way that Harlem in New York City became America's Casbah. It was Tuesday, May 19th, 1964, my 39th birthday, when I arrived in Algiers. A lot of water had gone under the bridge in those years. In some ways, I'd had more experiences than a dozen men. The taxi driver, while taking me to the Hotel Aletti, described the atrocities the French had committed and personal measures that he'd taken to get even. I walked around Algiers, hearing rank-and-file expressions of hatred for America for supporting the oppressors of the Algerians. They were true revolutionists, not afraid of death. They had, for so long, faced death. The Pan American jet which took me home, it was Flight 115, landed at New York's Kennedy Air Terminal on May 21st at 4:25 in the afternoon. We passengers filed off the plane and toward customs. When I saw the crowd of 50 or 60 reporters and photographers, I honestly wondered what celebrity I'd been on the plane with. But I was the villain they'd come to meet. In Harlem especially, and also in some other U.S. cities, the 1964 long, hot summer's predicted explosions had begun. Article after article in the white man's press had cast me as a symbol, if not a causative agent, of the revolt and of the violence of the American black man wherever it had sprung up. In the biggest press conference that I had ever experienced anywhere, the camera bulbs flashed, and the reporters fired questions. "Mr. Malcolm X, what about those blood brothers reportedly affiliated with your organization, reportedly trained for violence, who have killed innocent white people? Mr. Malcolm X, what about your comment that Negroes should form rifle clubs?" I answered the questions. I knew I was back in America again, hearing the subjective, scapegoat-seeking questions of the white man. New York white youth were killing victims. That was a sociological problem. But when black youth killed somebody, the power structure was looking to hang somebody. When black men had been lynched or otherwise murdered in cold blood, it was always said, things will get better. When whites had rifles in their homes, the Constitution gave them the right to protect their home and themselves. But when black people even spoke of having rifles in their homes, that was ominous. I slipped in on the reporters something they hadn't been expecting. I said that the American black man needed to quit thinking what the white man had taught him, which was that the black man had no alternative except to beg for his so-called civil rights. I said that the American black man needed to recognize that he had a strong, airtight case to take the United States before the United Nations on a formal accusation of denial of human rights, and that if Angola and South Africa were precedent cases, then there would be no easy way that the U.S. could escape being censured right on its own home ground. Just as I'd known, the press wanted to get me off that subject. I was asked about my letter from Mecca. I was all set with a speech regarding that. I hope that once and for all, my Hajj to the holy city of Mecca has established our Muslim mosques' authentic religious affiliation with the 750 million Muslims of the Orthodox Islamic world. And I know, once and for all, that the black Africans look upon America's 22 million blacks as long-lost brothers. They love us. They study our struggle for freedom. They were so happy to hear how we are awakening from our long sleep after so-called Christian white America had taught us to be ashamed of our African brothers and homeland. Yes, I wrote a letter from Mecca. You're asking me, didn't you say that now you accept white men as brothers? Well, my answer is that in the Muslim world, I saw, I felt, and I wrote home how my thinking was broadened. Just as I wrote, I shared true brotherly love with many white-complexioned Muslims who never gave a single thought to the race or to the complexion of another Muslim. My pilgrimage broadened my scope. It blessed me with a new insight. In 2 weeks in the Holy Land, I saw what I never had seen in 39 years here in America. I saw all races, all colors, blue-eyed blondes to black-skinned Africans in true brotherhood, in unity, living as one, worshipping as one. No segregationists, no liberals. They would not have known how to interpret the meaning of those words. In the past, yes, I have made sweeping indictments of all white people. I never will be guilty of that again, as I know now that some white people are truly sincere, that some truly are capable of being brotherly toward a black man. The true Islam has shown me that a blanket indictment of all white people is as wrong as when whites make blanket indictments against blacks. Yes, I have been convinced that some American whites do want to help cure the rampant racism which is on the path to destroying this country. It was in the holy world that my attitude was changed, by what I experienced there, and by what I witnessed there, in terms of brotherhood, not just brotherhood toward me, but brotherhood between all men, of all nationalities and complexions who were there. And now that I'm back in America, my attitude here concerning white people has to be governed by what my black brothers and I experience here, and what we witness here, in terms of brotherhood. The problem here in America is that we meet such a small minority of individual so-called good or brotherly white people. Here in the United States, notwithstanding those few good white people, it is the collective 150 million white people whom the collective 22 million black people have to deal with. Why, here in America, the seeds of racism are so deeply rooted in the white people collectively, their belief that they are superior in some way is so deeply rooted that these things are in the national white subconsciousness. Many whites are even actually unaware of their own racism until they face some test, and then their racism emerges in one form or another. Listen, the white man's racism toward the black man here in America is what has got him in such trouble all over this world with other non-white peoples. The white man can't separate himself from the stigma that he automatically feels about anyone, no matter who is not his color. And the non-white peoples of the world are sick of the condescending white man. That's why you've got all of this trouble in places like Vietnam, or right here in the Western Hemisphere. Probably 100 million people of African descent are divided against each other, taught by the white man to hate and to mistrust each other. In the West Indies, Cuba, Brazil, Venezuela, all of South America, Central America, all of those lands are full of people with African blood. On the African continent, even, the white man has maneuvered to divide the black African from the brown Arab, to divide the so-called Christian African from the Muslim African. Can you imagine what can happen, what would certainly happen, if all of these African heritage peoples ever realize their blood bonds, if they ever realize they all have a common goal, if they ever unite? The press was glad to get rid of me that day. I believe that the black brothers whom I just recently left in Africa would have felt that I did the subject justice. Nearly through the night, my telephone at home kept ringing. My black brothers and sisters around New York and in some other cities were calling to congratulate me on what they'd heard on the radio and television news broadcasts. And people, mostly white, were wanting to know if I would speak here or there. The next day I was in my car driving along the freeway when at a red light another car pulled alongside. A white woman was driving, and on the passenger side, next to me, was a white man. "Malcolm X," he called out, and when I looked, he stuck his hand out of his car across at me, grinning. "Do you mind shaking hands with a white man?" Imagine that. Just as the traffic light turned green, I told him, "I don't mind shaking hands with human beings. Are you one?" Chapter 19, 1965. I must be honest. Negroes, Afro-Americans, showed no inclination to rush to the United Nations and demand justice for themselves here in America. I really had known in advance that they wouldn't. The American white man has so thoroughly brainwashed the black man to see himself as only a domestic civil rights problem that it will probably take longer than I live before the Negro sees that the struggle of the American black man is international. And I'd known, too, that Negroes would not rush to follow me into the orthodox Islam, which had given me the insight and perspective to see that the black men and white men truly could be brothers. America's Negroes, especially older Negroes, are too indelibly soaked in Christianity's double standard of oppression. So in the public invited meetings which I began holding each Sunday afternoon or evening in Harlem's well-known Audubon Ballroom, as I addressed predominantly non-Muslim Negro audiences, I did not immediately attempt to press the Islamic religion, but instead to embrace all who sat before me. Not Muslim, nor Christian, Catholic, nor Protestant, Baptist nor Methodist, Democrat nor Republican, Mason nor Elk. I mean the black people of America, and the black people all over this earth, because it is as this collective mass of black people that we have been deprived not only of our civil rights, but even of our human rights, the right to human dignity. On the streets, after my speeches, in the faces and the voices of the people I met, even those who would pump my hands and want my autograph, I would feel the wait-and-see attitude. I would feel, and I understood, their uncertainty about where I stood. Since the Civil War's freedom, the black man has gone down so many fruitless paths. His leaders, very largely, had failed him. The religion of Christianity had failed him. The black man was scarred. He was cautious. He was apprehensive. I understood it better now than I had before. In the Holy World, away from America's race problem, was the first time I ever had been able to think clearly about the basic divisions of white people in America, and how their attitudes and their motives related to and affected Negroes. In my 39 years on this earth, the holy city of Mecca had been the first time I had ever stood before the Creator of all and felt like a complete human being. In that piece of the holy world, in fact the very night I'd mentioned, when I lay awake surrounded by snoring brother pilgrims, my mind took me back to personal memories I would have thought were gone forever, as far back, even, as when I was just a little boy, 8 or 9 years old. Out behind our house, out in the country from Lansing, Michigan, there was an old grassy Hector's Hill, we called it, which may still be there. I remembered there in the holy world how I used to lie on the top of Hector's Hill and look up at the sky, at the clouds moving over me, and daydream all kinds of things. And then, in a funny contrast of recollections, I remembered how years later, when I was in prison, I used to lie on my cell bunk. This would be especially when I was in solitary, what we convicts called the hole. And I would picture myself talking to large crowds. I don't have any idea why such previsions came to me, but they did. To tell that to anyone then would have sounded crazy. Even I didn't have myself the slightest inkling. In Mecca, too, I'd played back for myself the 12 years I'd spent with Elijah Muhammad as if it were a motion picture. I guess it would be impossible for anyone ever to realize fully how complete was my belief in Elijah Muhammad. I believed in him not only as a leader in the ordinary human sense, but also I believed in him as a divine leader. I believed he had no human weaknesses or faults, and that therefore he could make no mistakes, and that he could do no wrong. There on a holy world hilltop, I realized how very dangerous it is for people to hold any human being in such esteem, especially to consider anyone some sort of divinely guided and protected person. My thinking had been opened up wide in Mecca. In the long letters I wrote to friends, I tried to convey to them my new insights into the American black man's struggle and his problems, as well as the depths of my search for truth and justice. I've had enough of someone else's propaganda, I'd written to these friends. I'm for truth, no matter who tells it. I'm for justice, no matter who it is for or against. I'm a human being, first and foremost, and as such I'm for whoever and whatever benefits humanity as a whole. Largely, the American white man's press refused to convey that I was now attempting to teach Negroes a new direction. With the 1964 long, hot summer steadily producing new incidents, I was constantly accused of stirring up Negroes. Every time I had another radio or television microphone at my mouth, when I was asked about stirring up Negroes or inciting violence, I'd get hot. It takes no one to stir up the sociological dynamite that stems from the unemployment, bad housing, and inferior education already in the ghettos. This explosively criminal condition has existed for so long it needs no fuse. It fuses itself. It spontaneously combusts from within itself. They called me the angriest Negro in America. I wouldn't deny that charge. I spoke exactly as I felt. I believe in anger. The Bible says there is a time for anger. They called me a teacher, a fomenter of violence. I would say point blank, that's a lie. I'm not for wanton violence, I'm for justice. I feel that if white people were attacked by Negroes, if the forces of law prove unable or inadequate or reluctant to protect those whites from those Negroes, then those white people should protect and defend themselves from those Negroes, using arms if necessary. And I feel that when the law fails to protect Negroes from whites' attack, then those Negroes should use arms, if necessary, to defend themselves. Malcolm X advocates armed Negroes. What was wrong with that? I'll tell you what was wrong. I was a black man talking about physical defense against the white man. The white man can lynch and burn and bomb and beat Negroes. That's all right. Have patience. The customs are entrenched. Things are getting better. Well, I believe it's a crime for anyone who is being brutalized to continue to accept that brutality without doing something to defend himself. If that's how Christian philosophy is interpreted, if that's what Gandhian philosophy teaches, well then, I will call them criminal philosophies. I tried in every speech I made to clarify my new position regarding white people. I don't speak against the sincere, well-meaning, good white people. I have learned that there are some. I have learned that not all white people are racists. I am speaking against, and my fight is against the white racists. I firmly believe that Negroes have the right to fight against these racists by any means that are necessary. But the white reporters kept wanting me linked with that word, violence. I doubt if I had one interview without having to deal with that accusation. I am for violence if nonviolence means we continue postponing a solution to the American black man's problem, just to avoid violence. I don't go for nonviolence if it also means a delayed solution. To me, a delayed solution is a non-solution. Or I'll say it another way. If it must take violence to get the black man his human rights in this country, I am for violence exactly as the Irish, the Poles, or Jews would be if they were flagrantly discriminated against. I am just as they would be in that case, and they would be for violence no matter what the consequences, no matter who was hurt by the violence. White society hates to hear anybody, especially a black man, talk about the crime the white man has perpetrated on the black man. I've always understood that's why I've been so frequently called a revolutionist. It sounds as if I have done some crime. Well, it may be the American black man does need to become involved in a real revolution. The word for revolution in German is Umwälzung. What it means is a complete overturn, a complete change. The overthrow of King Farouk in Egypt and the succession of President Nasser is an example of a true revolution. It means the destroying of an old system and its replacement with a new system. Another example is the Algerian Revolution, led by Ben Bella. They threw out the French, who had been there over 100 years. So how does anybody sound talking about the Negro in America waging some revolution? Yes, he's condemning a system, but he's not trying to overturn the system or to destroy it. The Negro's so-called revolt is merely an asking to be accepted into the existing system. A true Negro revolt might entail, for instance, fighting for separate black states within this country, which several groups and individuals have advocated long before Elijah Muhammad came along. When the white man came into this country, he certainly wasn't demonstrating any non-violence. In fact, the very man whose name symbolizes non-violence here today has stated, "Our nation was born in genocide when it embraced the doctrine that the original American, the Indian, was an inferior race. Even before there were large numbers of Negroes on our shores, the scar of racial hatred had already disfigured colonial society. From the 16th century forward, blood flowed in battles over racial supremacy. We are perhaps the only nation which tried as a matter of national policy to wipe out its indigenous population. Moreover, we elevated that tragic experience into a noble crusade. Indeed, even today we have not permitted ourselves to reject or to feel remorse for this shameful episode. Our literature, our films, our drama, our folklore all exalt it. Our children are still taught to respect the violence which reduced a red-skinned people of an earlier culture into a few fragmented groups herded into impoverished reservations. Peaceful coexistence. That's another one the white man has always been quick to cry. Fine, but what have been the deeds of the white man? During his entire advance through history, he has been waving the banner of Christianity and carrying in his other hand the sword and the flintlock. You can go right back to the very beginning of Christianity. Catholicism, the genesis of Christianity as we know it to be presently constituted, with its hierarchy, was conceived in Africa by those whom the Christian Church calls the Desert Fathers. The Christian Church became infected with racism when it entered white Europe. The Christian Church returned to Africa under the banner of the cross, conquering, killing, exploiting, pillaging, raping, bullying, beating, and teaching white supremacy. This is how the white man thrust himself into the position of leadership of the world, through the use of naked physical power. And he was totally inadequate spiritually. Mankind's history has proved from one era to another that the true criterion of leadership is spiritual. Men are attracted by spirit. By power, men are forced. Love is engendered by spirit. By power, anxieties are created. I am in agreement 100% with those racists who say that no government laws ever can force brotherhood. The only true world solution today is governments guided by true religion, of the spirit. Here in race-torn America, I am convinced that the Islam religion is desperately needed, particularly by the American black man. The black man needs to reflect that he has been America's most fervent Christian. And where has it gotten him? In fact, in the white man's hands, in the white man's interpretation, where has Christianity brought this world? It has brought the non-white 2/3 of the human population to rebellion. 2/3 of the human population today is telling the 1/3 minority white man, get out! And the white man is leaving. And as he leaves, we see the non-white peoples returning in a rush to their original religions, which had been labeled pagan by the conquering white man. Only one religion, Islam, had the power to stand and fight the white man's Christianity for 1,000 years. Only Islam could keep white Christianity at bay. The Africans are returning to Islam and other indigenous religions. The Asians are returning to being Hindus, Buddhists, and Muslims. As the Christian crusade once went east, now the Islamic crusade is going west. With the East, Asia, closed to Christianity, with Africa rapidly being converted to Islam, with Europe rapidly becoming unchristian. Generally today it is accepted that the Christian civilization of America, which is propping up the white race around the world, is Christianity's remaining strongest bastion. Well, if this is so, if the so-called Christianity now being practiced in America displays the best that world Christianity has left to offer, no one in his right mind should need any much greater proof that very close at hand is the end of Christianity. Are you aware that some Protestant theologians in their writings are using the phrase post-Christian era? And they mean now? And what is the greatest single reason for this Christian church's failure? It is its failure to combat racism. It is the old you sow, you reap story. The Christian church sowed racism blasphemously. Now it reaps racism. Sunday mornings in this year of grace, 1965, imagine the Christian conscience of congregations guarded by deacons barring the door to black would-be worshippers, telling them, you can't enter this house of God. Tell me if you can. A sadder irony than that St. Augustine, Florida, a city named for the black African saint who saved Catholicism from heresy, was recently the scene of bloody race riots. I believe that God now is giving the world's so-called Christian white society its last opportunity to repent and atone for the crimes of exploiting and enslaving the world's non-white peoples. It is exactly as when God gave Pharaoh a chance to repent, but Pharaoh persisted in his refusal to give justice to those whom he oppressed, and we know God finally destroyed Pharaoh. Is white America really sorry for our crimes against the black people? Does white America have the capacity to repent and to atone? Does the capacity to repent, to atone exist in a majority, in 1/2, in even 1/3 of American white society. Many black men, the victims, in fact most black men, would like to be able to forgive, to forget the crimes. But most American white people seem not to have it in them to make any serious atonement, to do justice to the black man. Indeed, how can white society atone for enslaving, for raping, for unmanning, for otherwise brutalizing millions of human beings for centuries? What atonement would the God of justice demand for the robbery of the black people's labor, their lives, their true identities, their culture, their history, and even their human dignity? A desegregated cup of coffee, a theater, public toilets, the whole range of hypocritical integration. These are not atonement.
Context of White Supremacy. So we will be back next week. Same spot, looking like, I'm not sure. I think maybe 2 or 3 more sessions and we'll be all done. We are pretty close in terms of getting to the end of the book. But anyway, we'll be back next week, same time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. If you would like to participate, the number is 760-569-7676. The code is 564943#. Press *6 if you would like to participate. We'll try and nab anybody who had a hand up last time and did not get to share. No, Thomas in New York, you were one of those folks. I think it was one other caller as well who had a hand up who didn't get to share last time. But Thomas in New York, did you have anything you wanted to share, sir? Thomas in New York, you with us, sir? Or you, I don't know, you might still be in a loud area.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
How are you guys? How's the callers? Yeah, I had a few observations. I was on the bus earlier. I didn't want to talk. About earlier, he went to Mecca, and it seemed like he got indoctrinated into the white version of Islam. Those hundreds of millions of Arabs, they were sympathetic to whites. The Arabs today, especially the ones you got 200 million of them living around, 8 million white people, but the white people run everything over here. It's like, very confused. I think Elijah Muhammad's version of Islam is the only one that really will work for blacks because it's counter-racist. In his version and the way everything is worded, it's harsh on white people, it's can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Oh, sorry. Oh, shucks.
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me? Okay, yeah. So, yeah, I just think that this is the worst type of Islam to get into. It's just another form of Christianity. They did nothing more to give the nomads the name Arabs, come under this religion that gave them an Abrahamic lineage, so they're thinking they're the same as the Jews and the Christians, where they didn't even do that before. So it's just, I think that he was a leader, not a follower. He kept looking for someone to follow or something to follow as opposed to just leading himself, and I think he would have been a much better leader. His codification was great, like you mentioned earlier. Not to talk bad about Elijah Muhammad or the Nation of Islam when he was overseas, but he didn't seem to have that before he left because he went on the white media to talk about Elijah's transgressions, and I just thought that was a little like, And lastly, he had the prophetic foresight to see how Africa was becoming more Islamic and Europe as well, and the white Christians losing its influence, and that's, pretty much what's happening today. Word for word, how the African, half of Africa, the sub-Saharan parts are more Muslim, and so is Europe, and you see all the racism they're doing over there, but those Muslims, it ain't racism, it's religiousm, and something else. So
That's all I'm going to say. Thank you very much for taking my call.
For sure. I think we had one other person who had a hand up who wasn't able to share. Let's see. The person at... I found him. The person at 7947. 7947. Did you have a question, comments you want to get in?
I do. Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Just some questions for you. The first question would be for you in the audience, Gus. Good evening, everyone. He said, I don't know if it was this, he said earlier, or maybe it was this segment that you played, that he was the only person since W.E.B. Du Bois who made that pilgrimage to Mecca. Is it true? Is that true? And also, did Muhammad make that trip prior to him? I just find it pretty interesting that, I just want to know for that before I comment and move on. But let me just move on. That's the first question I know before I can make my follow-up question to that. I'm glad that he did come to realization that he said that it was very dangerous for him to regard somebody as that divine and not make any mistakes whatsoever. He could do no wrong. So he did come to realization of that, and I'm glad to hear that he did come to that. It seemed like Malcolm was always somehow treated like a celebrity. I mean, you know, when he went to Mecca, they thought he was supposedly Muhammad Ali, at that time known as Cassius Clay. Also here, when he came back, there was just this, you know, this opening, welcoming of arms. And I just kind of felt that, I don't know, I just, you know, when you're a celebrity, you do get the royal treatment. You know, as a person who does belong to an organization, and it's very important, you know, and the church also, I'm just thinking to myself, you know, he was a very typical figure. I mean, he really, I guess, brought the level of Islam in America to a different level. And I'm just thinking the relationship he had with his Muhammad, that I don't understand why they couldn't have talked. Like, that's why I really need to know, did Muhammad make that pilgrimage before him? Because, of course, he could have came back and told Malcolm what had happened, and they could have had conversations, because to me, once he went there, he flipped the script. I mean, it just was a total change, and I mean, it went against everything, not everything, I guess, that they taught here in America. And I could see how an organization can kind of be upset. I mean, if you know, if I have any problems with my chairperson of my organization, we sit down and we talk about it. It seems that, you know, a lot of us don't agree with the way he does things, or we have different views, but we all come to, you know, an agreement about things. And if we don't like it that much, we get up and leave and keep moving on. We don't go back and blabbermouth or whatever, just, you know, make amends. And was that the only time he was ever suspended, people in the audience as well as Gus? Was that the second time? Was that his first time out, or was it his only time out? Or did he ever go back and try to make amends? Or, you know, I'm just perplexed with that. Thank you so much for your time.
Mm-hmm. The first question, the book didn't say that W.E.B. Du Bois made a trip to Mecca. It said that I was told that this was the first time such an honor was accorded to a foreigner since W.E.B. Du Bois, and the honor was a party was given to Minister Malcolm by the Honorable Kofi Bako, the Ghanaian Minister of Defense and leader of the National Assembly. That was what he was talking about, was the first thing since Du Bois not making a pilgrimage to Mecca. I don't think he said that he was the first. Well, I mean, yeah, he didn't. That's not what he was talking about. With the second question, there are sources that state, I think it's in the documentary Make It Plain, and there's so many other sources, but I know Make It Plain, and there are books as well that talk about Minister Malcolm making an effort to try to go back and make amends. with Elijah Muhammad, and even around the heavyweight fight with then Cassius Clay, Minister Malcolm saying, hey, I can be present with Cassius Clay, victorious after winning the championship, and thinking that might get, and that's conjecture that some people offer as well, but there are numerous sources that cite that, Minister Malcolm had been trying to mend fences and make it work, and it just wasn't going down, and it should not be minimized. White people's role in making sure that that was the case, and spreading gossip and lie. I mean, that's a major aspect of COINTELPRO, to just keep this sort of conflict rolling by different means. But yeah, from sources that I've seen, he did make an effort to try to mend the fence, so to speak. And I have not seen any evidence of him being suspended previously up until this point. If somebody has info on that, that would be great. But I'm not aware of him being suspended prior to 1963.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Folks have other comments they want to get in.
Yes, I do it. If no one else has been the first time today, and as far as calling, then I have some other observations from the last reading.
Proceed.
I concur from the last caller. As far as from my years of studying Malcolm X, he was not suspended. He was suspended only this particular time. There was such a buffer, if you will, between Malcolm and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad after actually the buffer started creating itself well before the Kennedy comment incident. As was mentioned, when he started noticing that his articles and his name was becoming lesser and lesser in the newspaper that he helped create. So it was already there. Just as much as we caution ourselves within this program with the idea of behavior amongst non-white people, jealousy, the different things that are actually supportive of the system of racist white supremacy. So it was in the Nation of Islam also at the time, and that was affecting the relationship between Malcolm X and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad also. And we also have to remind ourselves of the technology of that day. They were, they meaning white people practicing racism, would write letters with the letterhead of the Nation of Islam on it to Malcolm and his organization with very negative comments on it, and in turn the same thing would be, and neither the parties, the Nation of Islam and Malcolm's organizations, would have any knowledge or anything to do with it. But it caused such a volatile environment, and we know on the results of what took place in 1965 due to that. Based on the readings, number one, Malcolm's strategy in Africa was to expose the American white supremacists to the African continent. Everywhere he went, that's what he was basically was on the top of his dais as far as what he had to comment about, or whenever he was invited to speak, he spoke on that subject matter. Kwame Nkrumah also spent a lot of time in New York, as well as he went to college somewhere in the United States, what's called United States, but he spent a lot of time in New York, and was a good friend of Dr. Clark also. there's an excellent movie on the revolt against the French white supremacists. I forgot the name of that movie, Gus. It's a black and white. Yes, that's something that I would recommend for anybody to look at. Excellent movie. Matter of fact, some of the actual Algerian fighters was in the movie. Was actually in the movie. I think the leader. I could be wrong, but I think the leader was in the movie. What is that when they have the words that you have to read in English? What is that called?
Subtitles.
So yeah, the subtitle is in English, but I think they're speaking French and maybe some other languages in the movie, but it is a subtitle. But it's an excellent movie that gives you, if you want to know from a audio-visual standpoint about that particular revolution that took place, that it would give you a good one in that particular movie. By using the technology of the 60s I have here, through news media, newspaper, TV, sound bites, etc., Minister Malcolm's words were taken out of context, especially on the subject of self-defense. And this caused him to literally be isolated as a visible and vocal person. He was basically nobody else wanted to be in that category at the time, and he was isolated, and it made it pretty easy for him to get killed. Based on, at that time, the conflict was already on fire pretty well. That was lying within the Nation of Islam and his efforts to stabilize himself and with his organizations. It made it pretty easy for that to go on. And even within that, there is evidence. There was evidence through other books and research to see where even within that conflict that he was set up to get killed. During that process, and all of the people who were close around him had that understanding. Also that he was in a very dangerous situation. And I think the last thing I got here is Minister Malcolm was not totally against Christians and Christianity, because another good friend of his was the Reverend Albert Cleage out of Detroit, with his Christian organization that was called the Black Madonna and Child. I recall, because I visited, that it was a branch that was in Atlanta, Georgia. Now, I don't know if it still exists or not, but it definitely was during that time. Matter of fact, he mentions Reverend Cleage in a speech, one of the speeches that's pretty popular. That he mentions Reverend Albert Cleage in one of his speeches. And that's basically all I have to say right now. Thank you.
The caller at, let's see, last four digits, 5234. Did you have a comment you wanted to get in as well, sir?
Yes, I did. There was a previous caller who had alluded to Malcolm speaking so highly of Islam and Islam's transformative effect after going to Mecca, and the fact that Islam as far as Orthodox Islam that he's speaking about was comparable to Christianity and its damaging effects on black people. I totally agree with that. And one thing I did know is Dr. Clark did speak to the fact that Malcolm never got to learn about Arab history with Africans. So from what I understand from both what him and Dr. Bain spoke about, he never knew about the Arab slave trade and the details of Arab relations with African people, and the fact that, first of all, their slave trade is longer than the European slave trade, and also the fact that it's still an active slave trade going on today. And they both had said unanimously, had he known, or had he lived long enough to get taught about that information, he would have abandoned Islam. There was no way he would have continued along the path of Islam, knowing its detrimental history towards African people. That's one thing I wanted to speak about. The other thing was, throughout the last segment that was read, Malcolm speaks to a human rights struggle, which gave him an international platform with which to call the United States, through the United Nations, out on their treatment of black people historically. And that was basically the catalyst for what facilitated his death, because he was in contact with leaders internationally, both in Africa and Asia, the Caribbean, South America, Central America. And he was on the path of bringing these groups together to all get together and form a formal complaint against different European powers, including the United States, that have been subjugating non-white people. That is detailed very well in Carl Evans' book, and he provided a lot of great information regarding how he came to that information. And the other part I wanted to bring up is in Carl Evans' book, he also speaks about the fact that towards the end of Martin Luther King's life, he came around to Malcolm X's understanding, and as far as the human rights struggle was the way to go, and that the civil rights struggle really could have only taken us but so far. And there was a passage I found in the book that really speaks to that, and I believe this is the reason why he was set up to go after Malcolm. If you don't mind, I'd just like to read it. It's a very brief passage that speaks to something that Martin Luther King said, and then relate him directly to Malcolm X. This is in the Judas Factor, the plot to kill Malcolm X. The page is 266. And it says, the same day, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. voiced an opinion markedly similar to the views previously aired by, of all people, Malcolm X. During a press interview in Oslo, Norway, where King stopped en route to Stockholm to accept the Nobel Prize for Peace, the civil rights activists announced that the Congo Civil War will not be resolved until all foreign elements are withdrawn. That's a quote. But King made even more revealing statement to reporters at the press conference, one which reflected his budding, behind-the-scenes friendship with Malcolm X. With the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, King said the nonviolent movement had gone about as far as it could go without international assistance and pressure. The next phase of the civil rights movement would be work in the field of political action and reform. Without international pressure on America, she added, African Americans lack the political power to take the struggle beyond the lynch counters, and so the movement will have to depend on a constructive alliance. While King did not spell out the nature of the alliance, FBI Director Hoover and the CIA, which monitored King's trip, knew that he was referring to a possible alliance with Malcolm X. King's statement in Oslo on December 9th suggested clearly that he and Malcolm X had arrived at a tacit agreement for cooperative action. According to Malcolm X, UN representatives would connect the African-American struggle to their own if Malcolm X, King, and other civil rights leaders cooperated to support the anti-Shombe campaign. Events the next day supported the conclusion that Africans were satisfied after King's statement in Oslo that he and Malcolm X were working together. And I'll stop there. Now, knowing that Hoover had always had a terrible fear of black people, of black Messiah rising amongst black people, and the fact that Malcolm had the half of black America that had no problem with armed struggle against white supremacy, whereas Martin had the other half of black America who was following his nonviolent struggle. So together, they would have united all of black America, and that's what they feared the most. And that's exactly what was happening just before he was killed, Malcolm X, that is, and that's also what facilitated the killing of King, because now their plan was international, and it was no longer a civil rights situation. It was an international call for human rights, which America and these other powers could not avoid because of their history. And I'll end there. Thank you.
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay, there are lots of rumors and conspiracy theories on what really transpired. But like when Gus pointed us to the, what was it, the Judas factor or whatever. Then one of those Hunt brothers in Texas, you know, and all cartoons, seems to be funding the NOA, the Nation of Islam. And I don't think this book mentions anything about it, but you have to think about the fact that why would a billionaire, all tycoon, want to finance the Nation of Islam? And if you can stretch your imagination to a point to where if you have an organization politically that is creating fear in the minds of white people, then you may have some usefulness of that particular platform. Now, you know, it boggles the mind to think that a billionaire would want to finance an organization that was for the improvement of the position of the black man in America.
Your volume is fluctuating, like it'll go up and then go down.
Okay, can I be heard right now?
Yes, sir, that's better.
Okay. All right. Well, I was thinking that the value of financing an organization that would be for the advancement of non-white people in America would be beneficiary as far as creating fear and a motivating factor for them to vote in an opposite manner, because it was led to believe that why are the Southern blacks all voting Democratic? And then if you divide everything between Democratic, Republican, or whatever, you know, then you can balance the political power. But I think that plays some, that has something to do with what was going on. I can't put my finger on it, but I don't think that that's too far-fetched for us to believe that the powers that be had a vested interest in financing the NOA and then solacing Malcolm X. I'll mute my line.
The folks that are listening online, just making sure you can hear all right. If I could just get a sound, I guess I could do it myself, but yeah, never mind. If you are listening and, you know, it's not asking too much, folks that are listening online, just to drop an email to make sure that you can hear clearly, that there's no distortion, that would be appreciated, but I can sound check myself. But if you don't have a problem doing that, I would be grateful. Did we miss anybody? Anybody who hasn't shared the second time around that had a hand up? Did we get everybody? Okay. Grand. A couple quick comments before we conclude. I think the analysis like King had the black people that were nonviolent, Minister Malcolm had the black people that were okay with violence, might be a bit too reductionist. Just Dr. Umoja, we had him on the program, and then also the book we had that it's very closely related, that nonviolent stuff will get you killed. I think both of those texts, both written by black authors, go into great detail about the number of black people who worked with Dr. King and participated in so-called nonviolent movements who were very all right with the idea of self-defense and were armed, protecting Dr. King, SNCC workers, Emmett Till's mother. There were lots of black people who were directly hand in hand marching, working with Dr. King, who were cool in the gang with self-defense all the way through. So I would offer that, number one, for just that line of thinking and encouragement. Read those two books. I think that'll give you a great start. That nonviolent stuff will get you killed, and We Will Shoot Back by Dr. Umoja. We covered both of the books on the program at the close of 2014. Other comments that I had from the book, I would again encourage folks to check out Carl Evans, The Judas Factor. Very important book for many, many reasons. Excellent read. Also, the section where we get a shout out to Robert F. Williams, Negroes with Guns, who is also about self-defense. Great seeing him pop up in as well. I was even wondering because I think Battle for Algiers came out around the same time in the 60s, I believe. If that was one of the films that they were showing, I'd have to check the time frame to see exactly when that film came out. But I know it's roughly around the same period, Battle for Algiers. Curious phrasing that popped up in the second audio segment where he said, Minister Malcolm X, what about those blood brothers reportedly affiliated with your organization, reportedly trained for violence, who have killed innocent white people? And I just highlighted that, innocent white people. It sounds as strange to me as white friend or well-meaning white. It just leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Let's see. Some of the other things that I highlighted. Yeah, this portion, it was really difficult to listen to all of this as though the quote-unquote religion of Islam has not been used and contaminated with white supremacy. We've talked about that before on the program and just how that has functioned in a very similar manner on the continent. It was pretty difficult to listen to all that, and my question got answered by the callers bringing out. But yeah, that is just simply not true. Let's see. Yeah, I thought it was great him being able to acknowledge the danger of thinking that a person doesn't make any mistakes and is divine and all that, and just again highlighting, follow the logic, not the person. You don't want to get caught up on any individual, particularly an individual that is a victim of white supremacy. That is just something destined to fail. Really appreciated the passage where he said, they called me the angriest Negro in America. I wouldn't deny that charge. I spoke exactly as I felt. I believe in anger. The Bible says there is a time for anger. Great passage. Great passage. Really appreciated this one as well when he said, the white man can lynch and burn and bomb and beat Negroes. That's all right. Have patience. The customs are entrenched. Things are getting better. Well, I believe it's a crime for anyone who is being brutalized to continue to accept that brutality without doing something to defend himself. If that's how Christian philosophy is interpreted, if that's what Gandhian philosophy teaches, well, then I will call them criminal philosophies. Excellent. Excellent. Unfortunately, that is immediately followed by him saying, I don't speak against the sincere, well-meaning, good white people. I have learned that there are some. I have not learned that lesson as of yet. He goes on, he says, I've learned that not all white people are racist. I too have not learned that either. I am speaking against, and my fight is against the white racists. Let's see if I have any other tidbits that I want to make sure I get in. I think that might do it for the week. I know I said there's so much material if you want to read and get more data, get more information. There's so many different books that you can check out, articles as well. If you can get a major university, I said Cal Berkeley, they have a lot of resources on Minister Malcolm. If you're down in the Bay Area, if you can get to a major university library, they will likely have Presence Africaine, which is a journal. It's published. I think it comes out of London. Could be incorrect on that. It's some European place I think it's published out of, but it's great. Lots of black authors. It goes back through at least the 50s, might be older than that, but they have a lot of, if you look in their archives of material that came out in the 60s, where they have different articles by Malcolm X, interviews, commentary after his assassination, during his travels overseas and what have you. It's just a really great resource. They have a lot of other articles that are equally impressive and important, but for this topic specifically, Presence Africaine, if I'm able to hit the university library before our study session concludes, I'll see if I can make some PDFs because it's just incredible material. And of course, white people would have it at their fingertips. Anywho, we will be back tomorrow. Again, if folks are listening, I know more people listen to the archives than the live broadcast. If you have comments, questions, things that weren't clear, feel free. You can email your commentary and then we can just read it on the air. Again, we should have probably 2 or 3 more sessions before we are all done with this text. But definitely thanks to all of the folks, Ross, Karma, Mr. Demery Ford, Thomas, Thomas New York, some of the other folks. If I missed anybody, thanks everyone for participating. I hope it was a constructive investment of your Friday evening. Again, we'll be back in about 24 hours. Compensatory call-in, workplace racism, details on what people have observed, news globally the last 7 days on the plantation. Will be good to hear from everybody tomorrow evening. If you get confused, have questions, comments, feel free, drop an email, untiljustice@gmail.com, untiljustice@gmail.com. We're on Twitter @untiljustice, Until Justice. Invest if you think the program is constructive. Racism-notes.blogspot.com. Racism-notes.blogspot.com. PayPal is in the top right corner. If you are not feeling PayPal, feel free to drop an email and we can hook you up with a physical mailing address. Again, thanks to all the folks who have supported, listened. I hope the program is a constructive investment of your time and energy. With that, we will be back tomorrow. I again encourage folks, sobriety would be best under conditions of white terrorism. It is one of the worst decisions we can make, black people, under the system of white terrorism, to be under the influence. While we are being terrorized, you're just making racist job way too easy. Do everything that you possibly can to make sure that you're not putting yourself in an unnecessarily difficult, dangerous position. Do everything that you can to be sober. Even as a pedestrian, I would not encourage being under the influence. It's just asking for trouble, in my estimation. If you got to consume any intoxicants, get to one spot, stay there. If you can coordinate, kind of pick one person's residence and stay there and do whatever you're going to do, and then move forward. That would be best. Just really would encourage, promote sobriety. That would minimize a lot of unnecessary problems, in my opinion. That said, Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people. We ask that you help us remain patient with other black people. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice as soon as possible. Context of White Supremacy signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. Problem. You're a victim. Yeah. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Mm-hmm. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.